Christopher Hitchens' death from cancer at the age of 62 has ended his reign as perhaps the most articulate and contrarian intellectual of his generation. As vibrant on the page as he was at the bar.
Christopher Hitchens here. My worst job was my first job. It was very important to me, because in those days you had to be a member of the union to get a job in Fleet Street in London journalism. And I couldn't get into the union, so I couldn't get a job, and if you couldn't get a job, you couldn't get a union card. But finally there was a new job created for a new magazine. I could still pronounce its horrible name, the London Times Higher Education Supplement. And because I was hired for a new job, I didn't need to join the union. It was a new creation. So I got job and union card, and I was so proud, so happy. And I was the social science editor. And I cannot tell you how boring it was, and how bad I was at it. And how I would literally watch the clock as the long day crept by. But it was a job, and it brought me to London, and it made me a member of the National Union of Journalists. And it was everything I'd wanted, and it made me miserable. And finally I was so bad at it that this couldn't be concealed from the editor any longer. And I got the sack, very traditionally in Britain, and I got the sack on Christmas Eve. And I was very depressed. I thought, how am I ever going to recover? I'll never get another job. Maybe I can't even keep my union card, but I still sometimes think about it and think, if I'd been any good at that job, I might still be doing it.
The feminists don't in any way represent the happy-go-lucky women I associate. And it doesn't represent the views of all those who voted for Ronald Reagan.
I'm sure that's true too.
So in other words, we got you again, didn't we?
And I'm sure a woman would have to. I'm sure a woman would have to be. Somehow I don't feel any sort of pain in my ribs. Perhaps I should have noticed.
He began by saying you were insensate.
I know a rapier when I see one, and I know when I've been pronged.
No, but
no, I'm sure, and I'm quite happy to grant you that a woman would have to be happy-go-lucky to associate with you. But if I said the women's movement, I don't mean to say that I don't recognize women as a sex, as well as a movement too. Terminological inexactitude is not what you meant to say, is it?
It's exactly what you.
It's a euphemism for what you intended to say. You want to call me a liar?
No, I wouldn't call you a liar, because I believe you are.
You know the provenance of the term.
Totally deluded.
You understand the provenance of the term.
No, I'm not going to call you a liar. I believe that you really and truly do believe these things. I've seen your performance in The Nation.
I'll state my position if it's of any help to anyone. I wasn't living in America at the time, but I believe that the American left, American radicals, American liberals, many of them, in starting the civil rights movement for black Americans, in combating an unjust war in Indochina, and in beginning the emancipation of women, the way we think about sex, changed the way everyone thinks and the way everyone lives far beyond the borders of the United States. It was a tremendous time, and the whole world is in debt to the American left, I'd rather call it, for those three enterprises. Now, it's true that they're all now in rather low water, those movements, but I see no reason to sneer at them now or to forget the grand contribution they made, unsurpassed by any conservative rival.
I think sneering is not the right word. I would
Jumping upon is the right word.
And here is the point about myself and my co-thinkers. Our belief is not a belief. Our principles are not a faith. We do not rely solely upon science and reason, because these are necessary rather than sufficient factors, but we distrust anything that contradicts science or outrages reason. We may differ on many things, but what we respect is free inquiry, open-mindedness, and the pursuit of ideas for their own sake.
I don't believe that simply by legally abolishing discrimination, you have abolished what led to it, the original singling out of black Americans, the original meaning of discrimination, where they were always mentioned, quoted, counted, and restricted. That by saying that now stops, you avoid any responsibility for the past, and you avoid the very tangled question of how we're going to make up for
you're making a
the inherited disabilities.
You're making a cultural point. If you say odd.
Hi, thank you very much. I'd like to ask Chris Hitchens two questions. And by the way, he's not a snit. He writes very insightful comments in his Nation column. My two questions are...
I think that the organizers of this meeting are to be congratulated on their brio and also, I think, on their timing. We are met today as witnesses of the decomposition of a political regime in this capital city, which uses the language of capitalism and of free enterprise employs the ideology of selfishness and self-interest, and stresses the rhetoric of laissez-faire, while bloating and expanding the role of the state, debauching the treasury and the currency, and relying upon a state within a state for the secret conduct of most policy. There may, and I think there will not be, any convergence of ideas between socialist and capitalist schools this evening, but this need not prevent us, I think, from seeing that a regime may combine the basest features of statism and collectivism with the basest elements of utilitarianism and libertarianism too. And I think if we recognize that, we may have ground for debate. What is it, I better get on with it, to be a socialist? Necessary conditions in my submission, rather than sufficient ones, must include the following. It is necessary to hold, firstly, that all divisions of class, nation, race, and sex are, in the last resort, man-made and can be man-unmade, are in no sense part of a divine or natural ordinance, and that we are members, like it or no, of one race, the human race. That civilization is, in fact, second, a cooperative enterprise, whether the cooperation is coerced, as it was in most of recorded history, or voluntary, as has been occasionally found and can still be found in our century. But that it is a cooperative enterprise cannot be denied. There is no other means, that's to say, of civilization. Third, that the limits of creative endeavor are set by the limits of nature, and that very few human actions can therefore be said in the last instance to be entirely private. The earth is, in point of fact, a common treasury, as the English levelers used to say in the Puritan Revolution, hoping that it were so. It is, in fact, the case, and again, whether we like it or not, whether we care to treat it as such or not. Fourth, that there is no God and no supernatural, that this recognition obliges us morally to maximize the felicity of the one life that we are permitted. And fifth, that the principle of from each according to his ability or her ability, and to each according to his or her need, is an easily realizable one, prefigured already in human society by the working principles of the bourgeois family. That unique engine of thrift, enterprise, the transmission of morality, operates precisely on the principle of from each according to his or her ability and to each according to his or her need. There is, in fact, no other way that a family could decently or possibly be run. I make no moral judgment as between the decency and the possibility. Such a distinction would be odious. Marxists describe freedom as the recognition of necessity, and only then proceed to say that the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all, a stipulation that obviously implies its corollary, that the educator must be educated. That's why I stress the above as necessary conditions rather than sufficient ones. We do not ask for these things to be true. We might even prefer them not to be, but we must recognize them as given and as such. Sufficient conditions, I think, center on the question of class. Marxists recognize that history is indeed the contest of competing social forces, and that so is the present such a competition. All attempts to describe society as merely organic and harmonious, or as a free competition or race between individuals with differing attainments and endowments, fail, because they ignore this simple and obvious fact, which again we do not preach, we simply recognize, insist upon, and make as a point of departure. Let me, if I may, quote you from Marx and Engels' preface to the German Ideology in 1845, where they say that they and their supporters, and I'm quoting now, "We do not preach morality at all. They do not put to people the moral demand, love one another, do not be egotists, etc. On the contrary, they are very well aware that egoism, just as much as selflessness, is in definite circumstances a necessary form of the self-assertion of individuals." I think this shows clearly enough that Marxists understand what Randians term, as if they discovered it, the virtue of selfishness. But as Marx and Engels also wrote in the same period in their Holy Family, they saw the need for selfishness to be transcended. I'm quoting again directly from the Holy Family, 1845 also. "If enlightened self-interest is the principle of all morality, man's private interest must be made to coincide with the interest of humanity. If man is shaped by environment, his environment must be made human." It is on this apparent paradox that we take our stand. And against the neo-Kantians, the early Marxists argued that morality could not be derived from abstract first principles of recht, or right, but had to correspond to the real conditions of society. Nowadays, I think this argument seems quaint in its intensity and fervor, because evolution itself, and specifically the evolution of modern capitalism into a new symbiosis with the state, has borne in upon the dullest mind the recognition that if humanity does not yet think in terms of a common destiny, it has at least had to think in terms of a common fate. To put it at its most vulgar materialist level, we are all collectivized by the same ozone layer. The thermonuclear world is a great leveler, and just as there can be no purely moral, conscientious objection in a thermonuclear conflict, nor can there be any merely ethical or self-interested collaboration with it. Everybody, after all, in this auditorium is a uniformed conscript. You cannot conscientiously object to the nuclear conscription that has made of each of you soldiers and put you in the front line while the real soldiers are in the bunker. This recognition of reality enforces a sense of collective humanity upon us. Again, we do not preach this, we recognize it. Socialism, said Oscar Wilde, would free us from the distressing necessity of living for others. The feelings of compassion and solidarity and responsibility, after all, are no less instinct in our species than those of self-interest. It's precisely because these instincts of solidarity and compassion represent a human need, a need to be of help to others, a point very well made by Professor Richard Titmuss in his famous book, The Gift Relationship. Because they are a need, there is no need to make the sentimental presumption of altruism or to wrestle with the tautology that altruism represents. Marx and Engels, I'll close on this, in the preface to their 1848 manifesto, made capitalism a series of almost lyrical compliments. And in fact, few proponents of the capitalist system have ever summarized its virtues, those of creativity, innovation, the bursting of feudal and antique tribal fetters, as well as Marx did. But Marx and Engels also saw what's since become obvious, that capitalism is not the last word, and that in freeing mankind from ancient obligations, it made him a prisoner of market forces which also developed their own mythology and ideology, their own mystification, and their own bondage. Like Comrade Judas, I also believe that capitalism is the harbinger of socialism, that it's necessary not merely to contest or negate its ethical claims, but to transcend them, to build upon them. And from this, if I may coin a phrase, dialectic, I think we might get a truly human and unillusioned morality that was free from superstition or religion. On that realizable aspiration, I rest my case. Thank you.
We do not hold our convictions dogmatically. The disagreement between Professor Stephen Jay Gould and Professor Richard Dawkins concerning punctuated evolution and the unfilled gaps in post-Darwinian theory is quite wide, as well as quite deep. But we shall resolve it by evidence and reasoning, and not by mutual excommunication.
Christopher Hitchens, columnist for The Nation. Warren Strobel, who writes for the Washington Times, was here on Friday, and he has a piece in Monday's paper that starts off by saying, pressures are beginning to mount for the United States to bring the 18-day war against Iraq to a quick end, creating a political timetable that conflicts with the military's best judgment. In other words, maybe a ground war?
I think it's appalling in a way that people talk about deadlines in terms of days, weeks, and months, especially if they're talking the political deadline. The political engagement that the United States has made is one of appointing itself the arbiter of inter-Arab border disputes and of the Middle East region as a whole, uninvited, in effect, and without a proper debate. I would say, when people ask me how long this is going to go on, I'd say something like 100 years. And it's not begun to sink in yet.
We are not immune to the lure of wonder and mystery and awe. We have music and art and literature, and find that the serious ethical dilemmas are better handled by Shakespeare and Tolstoy, and Schiller and Dostoevsky and George Eliot, than in the mythical morality tales of the holy books. Literature, not scripture, sustains the mind and, since there is no other metaphor, also the soul.
Live with Harper's Washington editor and Nation columnist Christopher Hitchens.
Good evening. Welcome to Talk Live. Talk Live is part of CNBC's Talk Weekend. And the talk kicks in at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time with Dick Cavett. Then it's John McLaughlin at 8, and then it's different Talk Live hosts at 9 and 11. Concerning myself, your choice for this evening, I have the honor to be Washington editor for about 10 years. In our neighborhood, New Jersey, New York, it seems to be a beautiful fall, but elsewhere it seems to be springtime for Hitler. There's a lot of activity in Germany and making a lot of ink as skinheads in Germany repudiate the idea of a foreign presence in their country. And even in our own fair land, the great state of Louisiana looks as if it might pick as governor someone with a record of membership in the National Socialist Party. Race and nation, in other words, are back as a subject. So I'm going to begin with a man who attended cross-burning when he was a lad of 10 and was taken by his father. 13 years later, at the age of 23, he's a leading member of the White Aryan Resistance, which calls itself WAR as an acronym, and is an organization of white separatists and skinhead youths from across the country. I'm talking about John Metzger.
Good evening.
Evening to you.
Most creative people in art, music, entertainment, Columbus, people that go out, find nations, things like this, most of them were white. Now, I don't wake up every morning and I have a fetish with it and say, well, I'm proud to be white just because of this. It's just a fact.
I was going to ask you, I haven't known you very long. I mean, I've known you about 2 minutes, but I mean, where did you get the idea that you were a member of a superior race?
Well, I think I had a lot of my opinions were set directly down from my father, of course, and I listened to him very intently.
It is within the compass of the average person. The study of literature and poetry, both for its own sake and for the eternal ethical questions with which it deals, can now easily depose the scrutiny of sacred texts that have been found to be corrupt and confected. The pursuit of unfettered scientific inquiry and the availability of new findings to masses of people by easy electronic means will revolutionize our concepts of research and development.
Christopher Hitchens.
I've got a friend in Jerusalem. He's an old resistance fighter from Europe called Israel Shahak, who now lives in Israel and defends the human and the national rights of the Palestinians. And whenever I call him up and say, how are things, he's prone to reply, well, Christopher, he says, there are encouraging signs of polarization. And the fact that he knows how to think that way, and most people don't, and are afraid of confrontation and of polarization, and indeed always use those words as if they were pejorative, whereas if you can claim to be a healer or a unifier, you're axiomatically privileged in American society, should make us wonder why it is that actually the consensus has somewhat managed to absorb this movie. It seems to me people underestimate all the time the fantastic equipment of shock absorption that this consensus has. Now, I would say the book drove me to read the autobiography again and to read James Baldwin's original script for the first time, and also to read another book that's very interesting, which is Spike Lee's own compilation of the book of the movie. Contains a lot of the original interviews he did. And I think I'd like to offer just some reasons why I think the consensus has absorbed it. Partly that's by the will of the critics and most people who write in this country, because when they can absorb, when they can say that something is healing or entertaining, they will. And partly I think it is Spike Lee's fault, that it was so easily assimilable into the general wet blanket of cultural discussion in the United States. If you consider the autobiography, the movie interview book that's just called X, you can get in any bookstore paperback, and the Baldwin script, you'll find 4 important things I think that are missing, or have been rendered blandly. Some critics point out there are some autobiographical details. I think my comrade on the right is quite correct in saying there's much too much show-off stuff of the early pimp days, the Malcolm Little days. Partly that's also to give Spike Lee a chance to show off in his zoot suit, let's not forget.
Which got an Oscar nomination.
Which won an Oscar nomination, yeah. Which is the bit that gets the Oscar, which I wasn't displeased to see. It was quite fun and so on. Then there are things where we, even those of us who admire him, can't be certain that the author of the autobiography was telling the truth about his father and about the torching of his own house, which is blamed on other black militants, possibly rightly, possibly not, maybe was self-inflicted torching, but these are just done uncritically. These are where it's too authentic in following the book, too faithful, I mean to say. Then there is the relationship between Malcolm X, and two very interesting and very diverse political groups way outside the American consensus. The first of these is the Socialist Workers' Party, a Trotskyist, internationalist, Marxist group with which Malcolm X was working increasingly closely at the time he was murdered, which was considered to the left of the left and was very much persecuted by the communist and fellow traveling consensus, which had a large part in the soft center of the civil rights movement. A hard internationalist group with which he, especially in Harlem, he was moving to have relations. The second out-group is, of course, the Nation of Islam. Now, since Spike Lee put Farrakhan into Do the Right Thing, where he really had basically no place, no business, and Spike Lee has in the book of the movie a very long and very tough interview with Farrakhan about his relations with Malcolm X, and where the question comes up, Farrakhan called in his papers, and other editorials in the same papers called for the murder of Malcolm X. And this is discussed and confronted by Spike Lee, who used also the Nation of Islam's youth movement as security for the movie. How come that he just dodges the whole question? How come that you wouldn't know there was such a person then or now, and there's both, in the whole film? How come that this hard, sharp question is simply left out? We know that Mr. Lee knew of its presence there. Now, I think that if you do leave out these things, there are rewards from critics who say how much you are maturing and how increasingly you earn your place in the respectable consensus, and indeed you may get Academy Award nominations, but you cannot complain if the big embrace moves around to say, well, at least you know how to avoid confrontation. The only thing that brings life to politics or to thought.
Very importantly, the divorce between the sexual life and fear, and the sexual life and disease, and the sexual life and tyranny can now at last be attempted, on the sole condition that we banish all religions from the discourse. And all this and more is, for the first time in our history, within the reach, if not the grasp, of everyone.
See, I think that I might be considered a prude. I think that American movies have become, some of the absolute sleaziest things on the face of the earth. This is all of them, mainly, television, the whole works. So to do that with Malcolm X would, in my opinion, have been something that Spike, if he took that advice, he was an extremely wise person.
Could I just,
Sure.
I just want to ask you a clarifying question. I think I know what you mean about Jefferson and Sally and so on, but I think, would you say it was the same thing, that you would have a very hard time getting a film dramatization of J. Edgar Hoover's tapes of Martin Luther King in the motel onto TV now, either? And if... Oh, I'm sorry.
Christopher, it's very hard to read.
If I'm not audible, I was just taking... may I call you Peter?
You probably would. I mean, people would get very upset.
Maybe I should have the
whether or not they would be able to stop it, I don't know. But I do know that people, probably the King people, and I'm assuming this, because they gave up so much to get that holiday that I'm not quite sure what else they're prepared to give up to get a movie. I mean, on the real Martin Luther King as opposed to the I Have a Dream Martin Luther King. I mean, they gave up a tremendous amount on him to get the holiday. So I'm not sure what else they would give up in order to get a movie done.
I mean, the other night on PBS there was, in effect, footage of J. Edgar Hoover in a dress as a transvestite hooker in the Plaza Hotel.
Well, there was
which
not,
is actually,
in fact.
There
were hints of
There was
this.
more than a hint. There was testimony from living witnesses. I thought it was the perfect revenge for Hoover's prurient taping of other people. I thought it was, as is Anthony Summers' book.
And I bet you that will end up in a movie.
Which
I
is,
think
after
we'll
all-
see J. Edgar Hoover in
Yeah,
a dress.
I think we will see J. Edgar Hoover in a little nice black little number strutting up and down. It will happen. And the reason I'm saying this is I do think actually all these things are not only possible but probably necessary.
Well, I don't think you can, to me, you can't compare. See, J. Edgar Hoover has been exposed. When you're talking about Malcolm X, to me, as a black person, then with a white person, you're talking about, Thomas Jefferson's. You don't compare Malcolm X with J. Edgar Hoover.
All right, fair enough.
And if you're going to compare him, you compare him with Thomas Jefferson's and the George Washingtons and the Robert E. Lees, and those kind of people, and how they are treated, the lies that have been told about them in movies and books and
glamorize
television shows and everything for centuries. These lies have been told. I feel lucky in having gotten to know Brother Malcolm is that I personally don't have to look upon him, you know, as a myth, as a god. I can see him as a great black man, not a great man, as a great black man. And so that's what I am looking for.
However, only the most naive utopian can believe that this new humane civilization will develop like some dream of progress in a straight line. We have first to transcend our prehistory and escape the gnarled hands which reach out to drag us back.
I don't think, does anyone want to comment on that?
I just want to say amen.
And Christopher, do you have something you wanted to say?
Well, actually, yes, if you'll say amen, then I think it might be the occasion to indicate my slight but I hope noticeable dissent. Look, everybody knows what a serious topic this is. We're talking about the struggle for liberation of the only large group of people who did not come to America of their own free will and who used to be property. Okay? You would, I think, be surprised how many people have got that point and realize and appreciate the seriousness of it. The difference I have with you is really when you say that if there's anything good in the movie, it's Brother Lee. If there's anything bad, it is Warner Brothers. I have not heard Mr. Lee say, I'd have made a better film if Warner Brothers didn't give me $40 million. If he wants to say it, he has enough money, and I would hope enough courage to say so. I also think that you're in danger when you say all art is propaganda of basically saying that all propaganda is art or would be considered artistic by you as long as it was made by black people. Now, that's what you said, or that's what you were broadly hinting that no one else's opinion was of very much interest to you, which is, of course, you're right. But I'll give you an example from the movie and the autobiography that will face you, if I'm correct, with a choice. On the chickens coming home to roost, which you said you thought tactically should not have been said, the, in my view, perfectly brilliant speech made by Malcolm X about the murder of Kennedy and what it meant in terms of the culture of assassination and destabilization. You said tactically you'd rather that hadn't been made. Actually, the real trouble in real life that Malcolm X got into was over saying that he didn't care about the crash of a plane load of white travel agents in Chicago, because why should he care about a plane load of crackers, which I think you'll agree is a different statement culturally and intellectually from saying that there was some revenge involved to the culture of violence in the murder of the president. Now, in the movie, there is a moment, which everyone remembers, where a young, concerned, honky woman of the kind we're all used to condescending to, and anyone who can pronounce the word empowerment knows how to despise people like this, she comes up to Malcolm and his group at Columbia, and she says, look, I would really like to do something to help, and I'd like to know what it is. And he says, nothing. There's nothing you can do. She turns away. And Spike Lee, who dodges all really important political questions in the film, is not above sending racial thrills of this kind through audiences. And so I thought it was appalling that that story, which indeed appears in the autobiography, is only told in the autobiography because Malcolm X says he wishes he now knew where that girl was. Because he wished he hadn't said that to her, and he wished he could find her and talk to her. Has little more respect for the opinions of some white people say than you do, to make my point direct. And is not going to make innuendos about whether they're Anglo-Saxon, Polish, or Jewish either. In other words, isn't a tribalist. Now, if I ask you this question, do you think that Malcolm X was right to say that in his book about the girl? And if you don't think so,
right
why
to say
not?
that he was sorry?
That he was sorry, and do you agree that's what he did say? And if not, why not? And if that is the state of affairs in the book, is it Warner Brothers' fault that Spike Lee opens that quotation mark in the film and then fails to close it again, and leaves people with a deformed impression of what the politics of the movie and indeed this discussion really are?
Well, I think that he himself said that he was sorry he made that statement.
Yes.
Malcolm X did say, and I have the statement that he made, that those whites who are sincere, this is a change, should work in their own communities. That's what he said. He said that he found that those whites, quote, who accepted Islam, end of quote, had been able to transcend racism. We got to be very careful about what he said about this.
I enjoy freedom and an access to knowledge that would have been unimaginable to the pioneers. Looking back down the perspective of time, I therefore cannot help but notice that the giants upon whom I depend, and upon whose massive shoulders I perch, were all of them forced to be a little weak in the crucial and highly and poorly evolved joints of their knees.
Anyone else want to address that question? Christopher?
I think one of the reasons for the disappointment felt by audiences who've seen the film and for the absence of the lasting effect that some might have hoped for from it is precisely to do with the question that was just asked. In fact, where does it take you? For example, I mean, Williams mentioned this, but he could have extended his remarks and said, you know, family values, abstinence from alcohol and drugs, sexual continence, small business was another aspect of it. I've read countless articles in the conservative and Reaganite press in the recent months saying, why aren't more black people like Malcolm X? And these are not, all of them are trying to be funny or trying to be teasing. Indeed, they are saying, in one of my least favorite terms of the moment, as a role model, people might do well to emulate him. Now, if his points were as easily assimilable as that, then I don't think one can count him as a revolutionary. On the business of Islam, it's been proved by every society that's tried it that Islam is not a basis on which you can organize a society. In fact, no religion can ever organize a state or a nationality. That's been proved by Christians time and again. There are many experiments going on now of different kinds of Islam. All of them are either failing or have failed calamitously. So as far as a preacher of Islam is concerned, not a success. I would, however, at the risk of seeming ridiculous, and I almost feel that I have an emanation of feeling ridiculous from my skeptical neighbor, Peter Bailey. But if you ask me, what does Malcolm X mean to me? And if you can suppress your titters, I can say this much. Everywhere you look in the world at the moment, whether it might be Bosnia, or Haiti, or the former Soviet Union, or West Germany, now unified Federal Republic of Germany, you can see there are always basically two kinds of people. There are those who think that the tribe into which they were born is the main thing about themselves, and nothing can change that. And if they could only like themselves more for it, congratulate themselves more about it, they would be only too happy. And there are people who realize that internationalism is not just a desirable thing, it's actually the only way the world can be organized, and in practical terms is the only way it can be. And there are people who've had the experience of crossing that gulf. And Malcolm X, who had everything that white racism could throw at him, refused to let the racists be his teachers. And that is why his example, in the moral and exemplary sense, is undimmed. And that, I think, would be an excellent way in which to remember him as an example of a road along which a lot of people have still got a lot of traveling to do.
The Malcolm X.
We do not believe in heaven or hell, yet no statistic will ever find that without these blandishments and threats we commit more crimes of greed or violence than the faithful. In fact, if a proper statistical inquiry could ever be made, I'm sure the evidence would be the other way.
Just as the election often seems to take place in a parallel universe, people who work in politics are a breed and race apart. That's another symptom of what I mean. There are those who are in politics and those who are not. There's no sense that politics derives from the electorate or politics derives from society. There are politicians and there are political animals and operatives. I know people who live for campaigns, who go anywhere for a campaign, who indeed make their living that way. The money is sometimes very good. It's not always very good. The starting rates aren't very great, but the rewards can be enormous. They love number crunching. They love to do exit polls. They love to do opposition research. They have a private language, of course. It's quite well expressed in a movie by Richard Gere called Power. I don't know if you've seen it, about the life of a Washington political operative. They're very adaptable. They'll work for any old campaign. If you wanted a good example of such a person, who's actually one of the very few who's been able to invest this little wonkish world with star quality, George Stephanopoulos is a very good example. He was looking for a candidate about 5 years ago. He was pretty sure Bush could be defeated. He decided he wanted the candidate to be a Democrat. He was prepared to go work for Gephardt. He had worked for Dukakis. He ended up working for Clinton. It was, in a sense, all the same to him. He was just looking for a campaign he could join. Now, Washington has thousands of these people, and I don't think that those who, in the end, get to vote have any idea of the life of those who decide what it is they're going to be voting about, if anything.
Do you think people like that, who essentially are, campaign gypsies, do issues matter to them, or are they basically just looking for a candidate who can win? I mean, what's more important for these people?
A thing that has often struck me in talking to the professional policy wonk or campaign gypsy is how little it matters to them, even if their candidate should win or not. I remember particularly having this feeling in the closing days of the Dukakis campaign. Various people in Washington had been drafted in, often from other senatorial campaigns, to work for Dukakis. If you talked to them about the upcoming debate with Bush and said, look, if you got Dukakis to stress it.
Hold on one second.
No, sorry.
Just wait a minute, Paul. Don't turn down.
I can do that again.
Oh, okay, yeah.
No, I could feel that.
Specific, like about Stephanopoulos?
In my country of origin, which you can probably tell is England, things are very slightly different in that you can tell from the shape of the chamber in Westminster, the House of Commons, where the benches face each other and the two parties confront, that the idea of cut and thrust, debate, confrontation and so on, though it can be more apparent than real, is at any rate the style. It's what sets the tone. Very, very different in the United States. Look again at the shape of the chamber in the Senate or the House. It's round. You can't tell from where anyone sits, so to speak. There is an aisle, but you don't look at anyone across it. Everyone's facing, as it were, towards the middle. And metaphorically, that gives you a rough idea that the search for consensus dominates. These meetings, no one can remember in this generation a colourful debate going on in the Senate. That's not the point of meeting there. The point of meeting there is to have a general management committee for the consensus. That and to raise a great deal of money and to redistribute it, of course, to the friends and supporters of each participant. Elections, therefore, become a search for common ground, and pundits will award and do award points to the person who can most convincingly persuade every elector that he or she is represented by the said candidate. Bill Clinton, it was obvious to me, earned his title as frontrunner, a title he got before a single vote had been cast. Please note, a title conferred on him before any American had dropped a single ballot or pulled a single lever, precisely because of his ability to be protean, to be all things to all men and women. And it isn't, therefore, by chance that that's rated as America's highest political skill. Then people complain that politics is too bland, that politics is too samey, politics is too boring. If you ask, say, a Ross Perot supporter, wake him up if you have to. No, don't. Just stop him or her on the street and say, don't you think that parties in America spend much too much time bickering among themselves rather than getting on with the nation's business? There's too much partisanship. The person will say yes. I'll guarantee that he will. Leave a few more questions in between so the trick isn't too obvious, and then ask him, don't you think the two major parties are much too much alike? He will infallibly reply yes to that too. And in fact, it's very unclear very often why, when you have movements that say they want a third party, it's very unclear to many people why they always fail. One reason why they always fail is we don't yet have two parties. So third party movements, I think, will fail by definition.
And I would argue this election will decide who runs the House for the next 20 years.
Christopher, do you agree? Is this an historic election?
Yes, I do think so. I'm in the weird position of wanting to recommend a piece that some of you may have read, and all of you ought to, in a commentary magazine by Daniel Cass. It's called Party of One. It's a study of Mr. Clinton's relationship to this Congress and the next one. Mr. Cass, I don't know, worked in the Bush White House and also directed, for his sins, the Lamar Alexander campaign. But what he I'll just, if I may, I'll just quote a little from this very suggestive piece. What he says, and what I've got every reason to think is true from conversations with members of the Clinton entourage, is that the truly emancipating moment for the Clinton presidency came when the Democrats were destroyed in the House. That allowed him to be unbearably light, to rise clear of his party. And I think it will be found in general to be true that he will do well when his party does least well. And that for him, this was a really essential, so to speak, defeat. What I'll just quote, if I may, from Mr. Cass's conclusion. Far from trying to rebuild his party, Clinton is trying to decouple the presidential engine from the congressional train. He has learned how the Republicans can be at once a steady source of new ideas and a perfect foil. I think that's very well and pungently put. I think the counterpart to it probably holds true as well, which is the best test of a hypothesis. If you pretend just for the moment, ladies and gentlemen, for an exercise to be Newt Gingrich, imagine yourself to be Mr. Gingrich. Get up in the morning, be Mr. Gingrich. Come down to breakfast, see Mrs. Gingrich there, that kind of thing. Actually be him. Who do you want to be president in the fall? Obviously you don't want a mediocre, senile, moderate Republican. What you want is Bill Clinton, from your point of view, to be the president. And I think that probably all the sides in this argument, which pleases me because it makes nonsense of the current formulaic style of bipartisanship. My view of that is always, as with Mr. Perot, the difficulty in starting a third party in this country is that there are not yet two parties. I think that this election will probably be the first, so to speak, bipartisan election of the new style, and it will lead to that kind of a Congress. And that will emancipate us in turn from the idiotic donkey-elephant discourse that's dominated everything from Herblock cartoons to Crossfire for so long.
Frank,
I can't personally wait.
We are reconciled to living only once, except through our children, for whom we are perfectly happy to notice that we must make way and room. We speculate that it is at least possible that once people accepted the fact of their short and struggling lives, they might behave better toward each other and not worse.
Do you see class cleavages?
No, I don't
Christopher,
accept,
do you?
I really don't accept that at all.
You know the old story about the Rhodes Scholar, the American, who meets his Oxford professor years later at a conference, and the professor says, "So nice to see you again. We've lost touch. What have you been doing?" And the American says, "Well, I've been doing a thesis on the survival of the class system in the United States." And the Oxford professor says, "Oh, frightfully interesting. I didn't think they had a class system in the United States." The guy says, "Well, no, nobody does. That's how it survives." I mean, one of the things that has... I've been in this country, I've been an immigrant here for 15 years now, I think. A lot of things have stopped surprising me completely. Some still do. The way that people will tell you about their therapists or their religious confession upon meeting still startles me. On United Airlines, they'll tell you about their shrink. I guess I'm still a bit amazed, even though I'm in favor of the right to bear arms. I am sort of amazed at the extent to which this right is invoked, so to speak. But the other thing is, I'm really amazed that you can offer a member of the House or Senate a common law bribe, the domination of the thing simply by large bundles of money, and also by the constituents, the constitution of it by people who to whom that's, you know, not entirely foreign to their nature. The number of people earning more than an average of about $1 million who are already in the legislature is extremely high and growing. It's increasingly a profession attracting either those who have money or those who want to speak the language. Very easy to learn of those who have got it. I think that there will and should be a populist revolt against that. I hope it will not be led by fascists.
Mike?
Well, I think there is a...
We believe with certainty that an ethical life can be lived without religion, and we know for a fact that the corollary holds true, that religion has caused innumerable people not just to conduct themselves no better than others, but to award themselves permission to behave in ways that would make a brothel keeper or an ethnic cleanser raise an eyebrow.
The real reason I believe that they're not backing Woody Jenkins is Woody's a social conservative. He is a great candidate, and the establishment of the Republican Party's got to wake up and realize they're alienating a good portion of their base. If they want us to be loyal, it's got to be loyalty returned. Unity requires a two-way street, and that's what I'm asking for, is a two-way street here. You be loyal to us as we've been loyal to them.
That's in ringing contrast to what we were saying about the decline of party allegiance and identification, is it not? I mean, it's nothing to me, really, but I must say I'm astounded when I hear Republicans say that the tent, a phrase I wouldn't mind not hearing again, should have room for Oliver North, but not for Colin Powell. I just don't see how that can be made to come out right. But as I say, I'm happy that it's not my problem. However, I think you're wrong by axiom in saying that your first duty is to support your own party. We wouldn't have Bill Clinton as president, in my submission, if it wasn't for Democrats for Nixon in 1972, which incidentally was a group mainly out of the Texas Democratic Party, which Clinton was then working for down in Texas with Taylor Branch and the others, who, having defeated McGovern, and thrown in with Nixon, became the Democratic Leadership Council, which became the comeback of lesser evilism that we all enjoy today. In other words, that, I suppose, must be one of the moral origins of triangulation.
Christopher, let's turn to Democratic divisions for a minute. Irving Kristol said in the last panel that Clinton was going to move sharply left if reelected. Do you agree with that? And if not, or if so, what does that mean for the Democrats in the House?
At least since, just to answer Mr. Kristol's point, I think at least since that experience in Texas in 1972, Mr. Clinton has been self-consciously moving himself and hoping to move the country to the right, and has done so in ways I think that no Republican leader could have hoped to do.
And so you don't see change.
I mean, I hope we'll get some questions on the floor from that. As to the nature and character of the party, I owe this aperçu, if I can call it that, partly to Murray Kempton. We were having a conversation in San Diego. He said, you know, the Democratic Party used to be a bunch of pretty tough-minded white Southerners who were appealing to the loyalties and the emotions of Catholics and Jews, and who knew how to keep the blacks more or less in their place. He said, well, they've lost all that completely, said Murray, with a slight note of regret in his voice. But look how the Republicans are masterfully reproducing the idea of a party run by tough-minded white Southerners that successfully appeals to the aspirations and emotions of, at least of native-born Catholics. I mean, I think they fall down on immigrant ones a bit, or have a tendency to do so. And so forth. Now, whereas at the Democratic Convention, if it weren't for the welfare-type delegates who we heard about in the preceding session, and the moral energy as they see it of the pro-choice forces, it would be very hard to think of what really got them going.
Mm-hmm. Most important of all, perhaps, we infidels do not need any machinery of reinforcement. We are those who Blaise Pascal took into account when he wrote to the one who says, "I am so made that I cannot believe." In the village of Montaillou, during one of the great medieval persecutions, a woman was asked by the inquisitors to tell them from whom she had acquired her heretical doubts about hell and resurrection. She must have known that she stood in terrible danger of a lingering death administered by the pious, but she responded that she took them from nobody, and had evolved them all by herself. Often you hear the believers praise the simplicity of their flock, but not in the case of this unforced and conscientious sanity and lucidity, which has been stamped out and burned out in the cases of more humans than we shall ever be able to name.
Christopher, partial birth abortions or gay
Can
marriage?
I say something on
Sure.
term limits first? I mean, I'm sure that Tony Bielenson, who I think is not running again, which I'm sorry for, made to me the point that I'll pass on to you. I seem to be being the ventriloquist for all kinds of other people today, but there, the dummy's role. If you get term limits, the only people who will really know how the place works will be the lobbyists. I mean, I think it's a point that's not made often enough. There will be people who are there for a very brief time, dressed in a little brief authority, totally at the mercy of the sharks. I think it's a point worth bearing in mind. I also think it's quite plainly, flat out unconstitutional and would be struck down. But I like the idea, because it might help to counteract Bielenson's fell prediction, that those committee chairmanships could be limited. Because I think it is the internal encrustation of the institution that people are trying to, that's the plaque people are trying to break down when they call for what I think is otherwise a demagogic populist solution in the form of term limits.
The other side of term limits is that now there are 2,000 state legislators in the country who are term limited, and
there is no need for us to gather every day, or every 7 days, or on any high and auspicious day, to proclaim our rectitude or to grovel and wallow in our unworthiness. We atheists do not require any priests or any hierarchy above them to police our doctrine. Sacrifices and ceremonies are abhorrent to us, as are relics and the worship of any images or objects, even including objects in the form of one of man's most useful innovations, the bound book.
And he hasn't created any Clinton Republicans, has he?
No.
You saw the woman who held up the banner saying Republicans for Clinton the other day at his rally, and he said, "I wish I could sign that and really embrace you," and so on. I don't know whether she was a plant or not, but if she wasn't, she's not the harbinger of anything, as far as one can see. There are no Clinton Republicans.
Not that you can see yet.
I think President Reagan is still very well remembered. It was a time in Washington where you had no hint of corruption, basically around the president personally.
That's really not at all
the economy.
Under President Reagan, illegal money was raised from drugs and from the sale of illegal weapons and the trading in human lives to conduct an illegal, unconstitutional foreign policy for a start. And Reagan was president of that secret government as well as of the legal government. He was a regular, habitual liar, and as for the economy, we're still living with his deficit. Mr. Garcia, by the way, you're young yet, but you'll soon get the knack of it. You have to watch when congressmen like Mr. Davis say what a great man Ronald Reagan was and how sweet his memory is and how fragrant in our nostrils is the recollection of him, and then to tell you that we're still paying 20 cents on the dollar in national debt, as if the two things were completely unconnected. Keep an eye on things like that, you'll learn a lot.
Yes, like I said, I'm not trying to destroy the memory of President Reagan.
Well,
I wish you were. I certainly am.
To us, no spot on earth is or could be holier than another. To the ostentatious absurdity of the pilgrimage, or the plain horror of killing civilians in the name of some sacred wall or cave or shrine or rock, we can counterpose a leisurely or urgent walk from one side of the library or the gallery to another, or to lunch with an agreeable friend in pursuit of truth or beauty.
And he is here today to answer the question, are alternative newspapers doing their job? Mr. Hitchens?
Thank you, Richard. Very handsome introduction. I know that Jennifer Flowers once entered a Marilyn Monroe look-alike contest, and I feel a bit as she must have felt, following as I do immediately on a speech and presentation by Cy Hirsch, who has always been one of the terms I don't propose to use today is role model, but has always been a real example to anyone who wants to use the power of words and language and reason for the purposes of justice and democracy, and also just for the pleasure of seeing the wind let out of certain major bags. No animals will be harmed in the making of this speech, but certain other phrases will not be used either. Role model is one. Fragile truce, I won't say. Emerging consensus will not appear. Bipartisan agreement, I don't propose to lean on very much either. I have a great friend in Jerusalem called Israel Shahak. He used to be the professor of chemistry at the Hebrew University. He's very lucky to be alive. He was very nearly put an end to in Poland in his youth. He's the founder of the Israeli League for Human and Civil Rights. He's one of the great moral figures of our time, in my opinion. I call him up every now and then and say, Israel, how are things going? And he says, well, he still sounds Polish. He says, well, there are encouraging signs of polarization. I call him quite often, actually, because living in Washington, I often feel I need to be reminded that that's true, that polarization isn't something to be feared, that polarization and the dialectic are what clarify things. You often hear people say, tending to pull on their noses or perhaps their chins, well, really, some of these things you've written generate more heat than light. It's always a safe thing to say, Ridiculous bloody thing to say. Where do they think light comes from? What is the source of all light? The source of all light is heat. People don't even listen to the cliches on which they rely anymore. If they could only hear themselves speak, but of course they don't, because they're pundits. They are transmitters and not receivers. That's half the problem of all journalism. It's particularly a great problem in this our fair city, the nation's capital. Now, when I first came to the United States, which was at the end of the 60s, I boarded a Greyhound bus and went all around the country looking for trouble, which was actually easier to find then, only slightly easier then to find than it is now. It's always there if you know where to look. And one of the many things that impressed me about the United States was that everywhere I got off the bus, almost, there was what you could call an alternative newspaper. You could pick up, if you were in Atlanta, there were great names to some of them, too. The Great Speckled Bird was the one in Atlanta, some of you probably remember. In Chicago, Rising Up Angry, particularly good one, a paper with attitude. The Berkeley Barb, the East Village Other. I don't want to sound nostalgic. There's been a lot of slightly slushy stuff about the 60s this year, but this was for real. And you could tell by its language and its presentation that it was for real as well. It had a language of anger, and generous anger, but real anger, and contempt. I think the essential ingredient in the journalistic
makeup, one of the hard counterparts of skepticism. It had solid news, and it had a lot of moxie. I'm not nostalgic for the psychedelic design. I've never been able to read white on red very easily, purple on yellow, things like that. But there was some artistry in there too. Those of you who remember the comics of R. Crumb, for example, or who come to know them later or remember them from the time, will know that knew what we saw when we saw them for the first time. That there was artistry in this movement as well. There were people who were really creative and who really genuinely felt that they'd been fooled and lied to and exploited and bullied by the forces of unconstituted authority, and really meant to do something about it, did not want to lead their lives that way, and knew they didn't have to. No one could make them. Only one member of the giant and genius category ever truly spoke his mind without any apparent fear or excess of caution. I therefore cite Albert Einstein, so much misrepresented, once again. He is addressing a correspondent who's troubled by yet another of those many misrepresentations. It was, of course, a lie, what you read about my religious convictions, a lie which is being systematically repeated. I do not believe in a personal God, and I've never denied this, but expressed it clearly. If something is in me which can be called religious, then it is the unbounded admiration for the structure of the world so far as our science can reveal it. I was asked to judge the prizes of you all in a couple of categories, and did do so, and I've got some observations on this too. First, there are far too many damn prizes in the journalistic profession. We're much too keen on giving each other awards. This happens at all levels of the trade, in radio, television, and print. It's like party favors or a caucus race in Alice in Wonderland. Everybody's got to get something. No one must feel left out. I think this is a weed that is spreading much too fast, and prizes should be awarded much more sparingly. And one of the curses, of course, is they have to be awarded every year. And it won't be true that everyone ought to win a prize for journalism every year. If you award them every year, it'll mean every year someone gets one who doesn't really deserve it. And I can tell you in some papers, it's really bad, because if you have won a prize above a certain level, you're practically unfireable. And there's a sort of log jam and clog up further up the pipe of people who once won a prize and now cannot be flushed out. That's the first thing. There is an upside, actually. In my opinion, probably quite a lot of mainstream papers would do no investigative reporting at all, wouldn't maintain even a team for it if they didn't think they might get a Pulitzer. But who wants a Pulitzer? When Murray Kempton got his, I sent him a letter saying I thought no less of him for doing so. Second, there was a lot too much small time. I don't mean small town, but small time emphasis in the stories. At a time when, after all, most mainstream papers, if not all, are more and more stressing that they cover the local stuff, that they do the details, that they're out there in the burbs. The LA Times is always saying, we're much better than the Orange County Register at doing the local story. It's not enough just to be local. And third, too many of them were written, and this is my main point, were written as if they would like to have been accepted by the metro section of a mainstream paper, and indeed could have been. And in fact, if I had them as printouts and not on the reprinted page, I could have easily mistaken them for that. Now, to be alternative, you have to be able to avoid the debased and the deadening style, the leaden, pre-digested language of the consensus. If you find you've said, when you're investigating some local puke or national puke, questions remain, or that the rumors about him, which are never rumors, by the way, they're always true, and it's always worse than you suspected, if you find you said that these rumors are disturbing, watch the hell out. In my opinion, it's just a theory, it's only a theory, but the cliches are actually waiting inside the keyboard for you. They're there already. They're programmed in. You just have to put your fingers on, and they leap right into the cortex and bang out onto the paper again. They're lurking. Watch out for them. Keep a stick by you. Whack them like snakes. Hit them over the head. Don't find you've said, questions remain, or friends say, but critics charge. This is a great New York Times one. I always think critics charge, but friends say. Now, back to those greedy, swallowing shoppers, by the way, before we forget them. There's a lot of criticism of the alternative press I've read. There's a rather interesting piece in The Nation this week, which some of you may already have read, about
the state of the alternative press. A lot of criticism for accepting money for advertisements. Well, whatever next? I was shocked to discover this had been going on. We wouldn't have put up with that at the Great Speckled Bird. I think this is just a stupid, false issue raised by pious people who have no real interest in kicking any bottoms at all. There's no conflict of interest involved. In any way, conflict of interest is not in our society the problem. The problem is the ghastly, gruesome, enforceable harmony of interest that we're all expected to feel, as if society was a bloody family, and that the whole of America would one day be one great, big, enjoyable Disneyland. That's the future that's being prepared for you, and there'll be no conflicts of interest there, you can bet. Don't worry about the conflicts of interest, and be proud of the alcohol ads and the tobacco ads and the sex ads too. You should be proud of doing the ads that no one else wants. That's part of being alternative. It would just be nice if you tried to produce papers that read more as if they were written under the influence of these things. What you've got to be on your guard against is not pressure from the delinquent ads, in other words, but from the respectable ones, from normal commerce and okay received opinion. Now here I declare an interest. I have a friend called Dan Perkins, known to some of you as Tom Tomorrow, who's a very good cartoonist who shows no interest, it seems to me, at all in becoming domesticated. And some of you run him, and more of you should. And some of you don't run him anymore because he ran a rather witty cartoon showing the Baroque outlines of a Roman orgy, which is his own rather clever adaptation, a reproduction of a classical picture, in order to give his opinion of the Washington Lewinsky blowjob fest. And the Oklahoma Gazette would run it, but its publisher and some people in the local community wouldn't have it. And here's what the local community leaders thought. Oklahomans for Children and Families, OCF, is lucky in having a man called Bob Anderson as its leader. And when asked if the cartoon appealed to his prurient interests, you have to be asked that if you're going to go through the absurd rodomontade of testing for obscenity, which you shouldn't do. Shouldn't allow the first step of that inquiry to begin, but never mind. Anderson said that it didn't, but that he thought it might appeal to others. That, by the way, is the definition of pornography. Otherwise, if that wasn't true, the censor would have to be the most corrupt man in the country because he'd be the one who'd be forced to read it. And we couldn't have a corrupt censor. Now, could we? But, he thought, he mused, it might teach a girl to try oral sex with another girl, or someone might say, I haven't tried anal sex. It might turn someone else on. Now, this deeply distressed and distressing man isn't worth a moment's consideration, right? He's absurd and sinister on his face and needs devoted professional help and some expensive operations. But no, he has it all his own way. The publisher of the paper, of the Oklahoma Gazette, is a person called Bleakley or Blakely. And he says, musing again, had I been asked about running the cartoon in question, I would have said not to run it, not because it was obscene, but because a significant number of our readers would have found it offensive. Mistakes in judgment sometimes occur. Measure us by how we respond to the lessons we learn, not by the mistakes we make. This is a love slave, right? This is getting really seriously indecent. Now, because he is a lawyer and because he has contracts with the school board and so on, I won't give you the whole story. They not just apologize and grovel, they cry before they've been hurt. And the cartoonist, Paul, doesn't look as if Tom is going to be in that paper again. I say that's an absolute disgrace. Don't be a journalist if your intention is to be inoffensive. Inoffensive is a synonym for innocuous, harmless. I risk everything and say emasculated. Perhaps I should say eviscerated. Whose ambition is it to be that? Let them go to another profession. There are plenty of professions in this great country that welcome such people. Journalism is not one of them.
Years later, he answered another query by stating, I do not believe in the immortality of the individual, and I consider ethics to be an exclusively human concern, with no superhuman authority behind it. These words stem from a mind or a man who was rightly famed for his care and measure and scruple, and whose sheer genius had laid bare a theory that might in the wrong hands have obliterated not only this world, but also its whole past and the very possibility of its future.
I was asked if there was anything the government did about which we can feel in any way comfortable. I feel there may be
a hook somewhere inside that bait. But, well, actually, you know, I discovered when doing my piece on HMOs that one of the things about a health system, a health racket that leaves nearly 20% of Americans uncovered, that one is surprised to find conservatives not minding about, is that it forces some people to stay on welfare, because if you are on welfare, you're an automatic Medicaid recipient. And Medicaid is better than quite a lot of the HMOs now. And it's also much cheaper. And the government manages to deliver that service. You know, it's not many frills, but reasonably efficiently and effectively and comprehensively. I think it also does quite well with the mail. I don't think it's bad that, you know, for 37 cents or 32 cents, you can get something hand-delivered the other side of the country in a couple of days. I think that's good service. What I don't think, this may just show my age, I mean, it's partly because of the time when I was growing up in the 60s. The main thing that one learned, and it's once you've learned it, you never unlearn it, is that all these people in the ministries and the planning rooms and the skunk tanks and so on around Washington don't know any more than you do. They're bluffing. They're getting through the day the same way as you are, wondering how it's going to play out. Their power is meaningless, and their knowledge is pretty empty and scanty. And to cover this up, they lie all the time. And so, how could it be otherwise? I mean, how likely would it be that the people in charge were there because they knew better than you, or were better people? I mean, very unlikely indeed. Yet how much of what they say is repeated uncritically as the news, because they say it was the news. The spokesman said it yesterday, it's on the front page. Well, let's make it easier for them if we can. Andy.
Hello.
You came.
I did.
Comrade from Pittsburgh.
A lot of people who put out even these papers, even alternatives, even who would put out or not put out Dan Perkins cartoons, are concerned about what kids may see, because they could pick this up at the supermarket with anyone else. You're a father and a journalist, and I wonder if you'd comment on us constraining or restraining what we put in the paper because kids might see it.
Ah, yes. First of all, did you bring the Pittsburgh Penguins hockey puck?
I left.
What?
And the Mary Lemieux signature is back in the hotel, unfortunately.
Well, in that case, I'll give you an answer. A lot too much is done in this country in the name of protecting children. I mean, in other words, I think a lot of grown-up life, so to speak, is being infantilized in the name of protecting children. One of my flags goes up straight away when I read that something has to be done to protect the kiddie winks. This is partly from a rooted objection I have to being treated like one, which is happening more and more to me. I mean, go to the airport, never mind showing a photo ID, did you pack your own bags? No, I got a chap who does that for me. No, federal law says it's a criminal offense to try and be funny at this point. Okay. Well, did anyone give you anything to bring to the airport today? Yeah. Who's going to see it? It's ridiculous. And it's also, obviously, it's clearly dulling the minds of the people who are in charge of security. It's positively dangerous. Yet it's enforceable at law. Right? And this is all treating adults like children. But not in the name of protecting the kids, but still. The internet they want to police the internet now to protect the children. They want to do all kinds of things to protect the children. I say the hell with it. The children I know all know a great deal more than I knew at their age. I get asked questions by my son that I wouldn't have known to ask my father, let alone dared. I'm impressed. I think they may have a much better time than we did as a result, getting rid of certain of the burdens of innocence. And it goes to the national obsession with innocence. I read the other day that Frank Sinatra's life was a narrative of America's loss of innocence. The time before that, it was Robert Redford's film Quiz Show that testified to the country's loss of innocence. I'm doing a piece on this. America's innocence was lost in the Civil War, in the Spanish-American War, in the First World War, during the Depression, at Hiroshima, at Nagasaki, in Vietnam, by McCarthyism, and at Watergate, at least. This is a virginity that grows back with incredible speed.
I'm against the infantilizing and the presumptions of innocence that go with it, and as a journalist anyway, I operate on the presumption of guilt, which I think is the only presumption our profession can bring to its labor. So, I'm as quick as anyone else to protest, and I have often, when video stores or newsagents or convenience stores stack the really rough stuff at children's eye level. You should see me do it. I've got people to move things really quickly. And without threatening to bring in the law, though I would certainly have done it. And a law against that kind of display is easily enforced, or local ordinance. That is absolutely never what the people who claim to be speaking for our children are on about. Never, ever, ever, ever. What they want is to get Nabokov and Tom Tomorrow. That's what they want. And that's what they must not be allowed. And they must not be allowed the first presumption of their onslaught, which is that their real interest is in protecting the young. Their real interest is in, why, after all, why don't they call for prayer in the trains? Or prayer on the stock exchange? All right? Or prayer in the compulsory prayer for the armed forces? Or in the boardroom, somewhere where, if it does any good, which I don't think, I think like holy water, it may not do any good, it doesn't do any harm. But if it did do any good, it might really come in handy. No, they want it in the schools. Why do you think they want it in the schools? Because they want a captive audience, and they want an audience they can mold and they can form, and they're not going to be allowed to have it. And we're going to tell them to get right out of here every time they try. So,
he devoted the greater part of his life to a grand refusal of the role of a punitive prophet, preferring to spread the message of enlightenment and humanism. Decidedly Jewish and exiled and defamed and persecuted as a consequence, he preserved what he could of ethical Judaism and rejected the barbaric mythology of the Pentateuch. We have more reason to be grateful to him than to all the rabbis who have ever wailed or who ever will. Offered the first presidency of the State of Israel, Einstein declined because of his many qualms about the way Zionism was tending. This was much to the relief of David Ben-Gurion, who had nervously asked his cabinet, "What are we going to do if he says yes?"
I don't know. I never have conversations with the advertising people. At the old New Yorker, the advertising department was on a different floor, which didn't connect by the same elevator. They weren't allowed to talk to each other. In fact, if met on the street, a member of the business division was not allowed to compliment a New Yorker writer on a story. That was considered a great breach of etiquette. They weren't supposed to know each other. Fine, as long as the people in the management department and the business department are drumming up some money. But I insist that they do that as well as stay out of my face. Let's get real. Therefore, I'm probably not the right one to advise you about how to strike the balance, but I'm glad to hear you say that you're glad to run deviant advertisements, because deviance and delinquency are of the first importance.
But why don't they see that as that difference as healthy, as good, as what we should be?
Well, if they don't, it probably means you're doing something right.
We don't want your money because you're selling sex. I mean, to me, I say, go out and get that money and give me a raise.
Yes. You got me.
You feel the journalist has an obligation to get it right. And I say that alluding to your remark earlier that all the rumors are true and they're worse than you think they are, except that sometimes they're not.
Well, I think, I do tend to think that most rumors about the powerful are true. Most of them have proved out in my experience. And I do think we have to operate on the presumption of guilt. It makes me angry every time people say, so-and-so has been subjected to trial by media. There is no such thing. We cannot subpoena anybody, okay, nor can we depose anybody, nor very often can we, or even when we can at press conferences, we miss the chance to cross-examine people. And we certainly can't send anyone to jail. More's the pity. So it's masochistic to worry about trial by media. There should be, I wish there was something more like a court of public opinion in this country. And I have big ideas about who it should haul in front of itself. But there isn't. So it's funny, it's both masochistic and sort of partly sadistic to say that there is, when there isn't. I think it's creepy, in other words. If something is a non-substantiated rumor, then the way to deal with it is as follows. Use the press conference to ask the guy. They should be asked. Okay, there are a lot of times embarrassing questions are not asked because access will be forbidden to the person who asks that question. It's very common for press conferences now for people to say, you know, if you, especially to out-of-town reporters who may want to make an impression back home, if you ask, we'll call on you. You can ask a question and you'll be on the nightly news if you'll make sure it's a friendly one. That's done a lot.
They should instead use that time to ask the question everyone's been wanting to know the answer to but doesn't want to be the one to ask. That's the job, okay? Now, obviously, it's too wearying to go into this business of the internet and Matt Drudge and so on again and again. But, and I don't think Drudge is a journalist. I think he's a pimp. I think he's an operative for undisclosed, not very decorative political interests who simply feed him material. He does no digging. Okay, he's just a conduit. They could have, and they very soon will be able to have a cybernetized version of him. They don't need a human being, they just need the site. They can put their own gunk up there and put it in circulation. And probably they could invent some kind of Truman character to do it, or wag the dog asshole, as a surrogate figure. But I have to say that what he said in the National Press Club, where I don't think he should have been invited last week, was true, that the speed by which news can materialize or suggest itself cybernetically has broken the hold of the old news cycle. And that's a good thing, because it used to be that there were gatekeepers in Washington on all the newspapers and all the television shows and chat shows, and they would decide what the news was. And if people didn't want something to be news, everyone knew that the White House would put it out in the Saturday afternoon release, and all this kind of thing, and that was all clearly understood and part of the rules, and the people who did it went and played golf with the people who put it out. And that's over now. They can't do that anymore. They've lost control. And though some of the things that result from that are unpleasant and vulgar, I think one mustn't neglect the upside of it. So let the arbitration of public opinion decide whether something's true or not. What I did not join the profession to do was to know what the rumor is in Washington, and none of my readers know, and keep it to myself. Let them arbitrate it. Let them test its credibility. After a while, I think Gresham's law could go into reverse. People would know immediately what to discard and what to take seriously. But we can't be the ones doing that for them. I'm not a filter. I'm a transmitter. I hope. Sir. Oh, wearisome condition of humanity, born under one law to another bound, vainly begot and yet forbidden vanity, created sick, commanded to be sound. Fulk Greville, Mustafa.
What are your thoughts on Steve Brill's new magazine content?
I got a call from someone who was writing a piece about it, and I was very suspicious, I have to say, because I have a feeling that the wrong people are going to like it. This is maybe wrong for me to prejudge it, but one of the assumptions appeared to be similar to the one that Congress came up with in the form of that complete popinjay and jerk Senator Byrd, former Klansman and fiddle player, who's a pork stuffer for West Virginia. And he said when it was decided that congressional emoluments should be fully disclosed, speaking fees and all that kind of thing, which I think they should, he said, well, then all journalists should be forced to disclose what their speaking fees and other emoluments are. And to a lot of people, that seemed like a fair trade. Not a bit of it. I won't hear a bar of that ditty. Certainly not from Senator Byrd, actually not from anybody else either. No, well, we are not running for office. We don't claim to speak for anyone else. We're not charged legally with the same responsibilities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's none of their business. Okay, we're a different kind of profession. The same would be true for the attempt made by some people in the Clinton White House. It was aborted, but there was a plan to say, well, how would the sex lives of those who are questioning the president really stack up? Well, suppose they'd gone ahead with that plan, which I know was discussed. So what? You don't have to be pure to ask the question, okay? Because you aren't the one who's involved in the conflict of interest or the harmony of interest that is under investigation. I had a feeling from the way the questioning went from this guy from Brill's shop that they were sharing in the assumption that the press should be investigated. Okay, and that will appeal to exactly the wrong kind of instant populism. So I'm very much on my guard against it, and I hope I'm wrong in my suspicions. And do you think that unto such as you, a maggot-minded, starved, fanatic crew, God gave a secret and denied it me? Well, well, what matters it? Believe that too. The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, in the Richard Le Gallienne translation.
Immensely,
Thank
but
you.
feeling a little bit disappointed because I'm not sure you've nailed the question that we were sold. That is, you know, are we here sitting here worth the paper we're printed on? How do you assess what we do?
Well, I don't read you all, but I told you what I read of the prize entries, and in a recent piece I did on the state of collapse of Washington, D.C., which I said is a great local story, but it's the nation's capital, so it's a national scandal. I tried again with my trope about this. It is to do with small-town corruption and small-town mentality and graft and police thuggery and filth and incompetence and so on. But it is a national disgrace because it's supervised by Congress in a disenfranchised town. And I did say in there that I thought that the city paper had done a very good job in staying on Barry's case all along, where there was always a temptation, succumbed to by the Washington Post, particularly in the early years, to think of him as perhaps deserving of a free pass because he was black, for example, or at least some indulgence, some slack. They never succumbed to any of that, and I thought that was good. So, but if I came to say, if you saw the sign saying Christopher Hitchens will appear at 2 o'clock and give credit where it is due, I imagine the room would be half empty. I certainly hope so.
Peacefully they will die. Peacefully they will expire in your name, and beyond the grave they will find only death. But we will keep the secret, and for their own happiness we will entice them with a heavenly and eternal reward. The Grand Inquisitor to his Saviour in The Brothers Karamazov.
One more, I'm told. So.
Yes, there's been a lot of commentary in the daily press in the last few days about the forthcoming photo spread of Monica Lewinsky photos in Vanity Fair. And most of it has focused on why on earth she and her now ex-legal team would have made the decision to go forward. The question I have is, why on earth is Vanity Fair running those photographs? And you're talking about pandering to the common tastes. What decision process do you think went into that for them?
Well, you are addressing the author of the accompanying text of that. And when you read it, I also want you to know I wrote all the captions, okay, as well as the sign bit.
I'm glad that I didn't.
Every word on that page is by me, including the unsigned bits. And I had to say to Mr. King the other night on his show that I thought my long-held theory that one word is worth 1,000 pictures needed some consideration. I thought some attention should be paid to the text, because that explains a lot of the answer to your question. He consented to read out a couple of, I thought, rather well-turned sentences. What was my astonishment, though, when he said, "But Chris," he calls me Chris, which I can't bear. I always call him Mr. King. I don't know the guy. That's another thing, by the way. People who go on Nightline and say Ted, again, you already know. No, it's all very bad. The journalistic habit of referring to celebrities by their nicknames, OJ, Di, all that, Ollie, very bad. Rot, real rot, cretinizing rot, spreads like wildfire. He said, but Chris, you'll have to admit, this is celeb-dom. I was flabbergasted. I was on Larry King to say that celebrity-dom should not be discussed. I didn't know quite how to handle it. I think I chose my words, I hope with care, and I said, well, yes, I think she qualifies. And then I said I didn't come on Larry King to run down the idea of celebrity, surely. But what I should have said, and it occurred to me afterwards, arrière-pensée, was that celebrity, as we use it pejoratively or mockingly, it means someone who's well-known just for being well-known. Okay, the original definition of Daniel Boorstin when he wrote his famous essay on the non-event, the media-created event, the thing that wouldn't happen if there were no cameras there. Monica Lewinsky, it seems to me, is not in that category. She is a major player. That may be, to a large extent, inadvertent, though there are certain things I don't think you can do without knowing you're doing them, or by accident, or passively. And she has changed the course and shape of American politics, and may do so more yet. So the fact that we've subsisted until now on a very meager diet of mugshots and old pictures taken from her ID cards and so on seemed to me a shame. It was a good thing to get a square look at her. And we beat the whole national press on that.
As and when I wish, I can use a simple laptop to acquaint myself with the life and work of Anaxagoras and Erasmus, Epicurus and Wittgenstein. Not for me the pouring in the library by candlelight, the shortage of texts or the difficulties of contact with like-minded persons in other ages or societies. And not for me, except when the telephone sometimes rings, and I hear hoarse voices condemning me to death or hell or both, the persistent fear that something I write will lead to the extinction of my work, the exile or worse of my family, the eternal blackening of my name by religious frauds and liars, and the painful choice between recantation or death by torture.
He's a contributing editor to Vanity Fair, and his new book is No One Left to Lie To, The Triangulations of William Jefferson Clinton. I'm guessing not a fan of the president. Christopher Hitchens right over here. Hey, it's been too long.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you for coming back. This guy is the best one. He is the real deal. So my question is, what do you know that they don't?
Well, ask me on my deathbed. I think I'd have to be that far gone to make the mistake you just made. Mr. Clinton had 2 cabinet meetings last year, count them, 2. One to lie to his cabinet in January, one in August to say, sorry guys, I'm going to have to tell some of the truth now. He had no press conferences unless he was forced to by the visits of Nelson Mandela, Václav Havel, Tony Blair, and King Hussein, any one of whom is worth 25. Yeah, any one of whom.
He didn't have enough press conferences.
Any one of whom is worth 25 of him. None on his own. No, he had to.
So Nelson Mandela's crazy. Václav Havel's crazy.
He had to embarrass his guests in order to appear. He wouldn't take questions on his own. He wouldn't say, "I know you want to ask Mr. Mandela something. You might have some questions for me."
Yeah, but give the guy a break. I mean,
he used Nelson Mandela as a human shield. What could be more disgraceful than that?
Our country is in great shape financially. That's a big deal for all of us. People are enjoying being able to afford
They can buy
food.
the Buttmaster.
They can buy the Buttmaster. Everyone can have one.
There's a torso track, too.
You had to bring that up. And Paula Jones is 800 grand better off. Which is
she can have the Buttmaster.
No, wait a minute. Listen. The guy is... The guy's a complete reptile. You know that, don't you?
Yeah, but you know, can we speak from a place of compassion? All right, the female here.
But I think, on the other hand, speaking of therapy, which I wanted to ask you, is what is it, you have such vitriol for popular icons, whether it's Mother Teresa or Princess Di, and now William Jefferson Clinton. And I want to know, what is it that you find, this profound disdain you have for these people who...
That kind of does put some perspective on it. You don't like Clinton, you don't like Mother Teresa.
You don't like Princess Di.
Princess Di, yeah.
I mean, you know, she died with a bucket. That was her only possession. How can you not like her?
Where'd she get that bucket?
Yeah, exactly.
No. You didn't do the audit. You didn't do the audit. But since you asked, I quite like Mr. Mandela and Mr. Harville, both of whom I've met as a journalist also. I have some kind things to say for some people. Mr. Clinton, you say it's the same. Mr. Clinton is a rapist, okay? Been plausibly accused. Yes. Plausibly, believably accused 3 times of rape.
So accusations equal reality in your journalistic world. That's the problem with journalism, which is more screwed up than politics, my friend.
Your people will clap bloody anything, won't they?
They will, but you know what?
I operate on the presumption of guilt, and so do you. I can't convict anybody, but I'm not going to say Juanita Broderick is a liar, because everything she says checks out, and President Clinton hasn't denied it yet. He won't comment on the accusations. It's not his word against hers.
And
if it was, it would be the word of a psychopathic liar.
So in other words, if somebody accuses you of something and you don't dignify it with a comment, you're guilty of it.
Okay,
that's an interesting judicial system that we don't have here in America, I have to tell you.
I'm not a judge, I'm not even a jury.
Oh, but you are a judge. You just said he's a rapist.
Take that look off your face. No, I have an opinion, and I'll defend it.
But you know, going back to this feminine thing here,
you can have that mirror turn towards you as well.
People who have pain have ways of taking pain away.
I was accused of rape, I deny it.
Sex.
So,
well, no, you're not accused of rape. You've certainly been accused of many things in the past several months.
I'll try another one. Yesterday it was agreed by the Treasury Department and the Defense Department that the factory in Sudan that makes all the medicines in Sudan...
I can't get into Sudan. I have to take a commercial. But we'll get into Sudan when we come back.
The fact that he excels despite all the things that are
Excels,
going on.
no. The comeback kid stuff is the Hannibal Lecter sign about him. He doesn't hurt. He doesn't suffer from humiliation, from disgrace, from ruining the life of his wife, his daughter. It doesn't hurt him.
Look, it is a democracy. It is a democracy here, and his rating is something like, what, 60%?
It's the sign of a psycho.
It's a sign of a psycho to be strong.
No,
We're
strong about what?
What do you want, a president?
Strong about what? He's a pussycat in relation to Milosevic. He's a pussycat in relation to Hussein. He's a pussycat to the opinion polls, to Wall Street, to the Federal Reserve. He rolls over and plays dead. There's nothing strong about him at all.
He's a pussycat to Milosevic?
It's nothingness. Now at last. Now some genuine, thoughtful applause.
No, those are people like you who hate him from the get-go, and it doesn't matter what the facts are, because the hate comes first, and then you fit the facts into the hate.
I was trying to give you some facts, and you called a break.
They're not...
Shut up!
But I was going to ask, wait a second.
I was giving you some facts, you called a break.
I know, but I don't want to get into the Sudan.
Sudan, I can do it in one sentence.
Okay.
It's been admitted this week in open court in Washington by the Treasury and the Defense Departments that every claim they made and the President made about the only pharmaceutical factory in a poor country, Sudan, that Clinton blew up on the day Mr. Lewinsky went back to the grand jury. Every claim they made is false. They've apologized. They're going to have to pay compensation. Live with it. Live with it. He's not just a rapist. He's a war criminal.
He's not a rapist. I take exception to you and the rest of you people.
Did you mention the price of my
in the
book?
Washington Press
Doing
Forum,
facts is
no respect for the president or the
price.
office that it holds. And I think that's a reason for some of the problems with what's going on with the presidency and partisan politics. There's no respect for the office.
And you know what? He had the wrong address. He had the wrong address, and nobody likes him there because it's a good old boys club, and they like when you come from political families. It's just much easier to understand. But he came from Arkansas, and I've never seen such a witch hunt. Have you?
I've never seen it. And I was going to ask, is it this being from this alcoholic family?
His wife said they hate us because we're from Arkansas. She's from Lake Forest, Illinois.
We're talking about him.
She's from a ritzy family in Illinois. It's Huri who said, only she has ever said, they hate us because we're from Arkansas. And she's not from there.
Yeah, but she spent the better part of her life there. She was the first lady of Arkansas.
They can't even be phony in the right way.
But
everything about them is false.
Don't you think before you call someone a rapist, whether they're a citizen or the president, you should know it for sure? You should have that as a...
I've written a long article about why she's right.
Were you there?
But you weren't there. It was 20 years ago.
How do you know I wasn't there? Are you asking me or telling me?
I'm asking you. Were you there?
Well, you weren't there.
Apparently where you're from, which is in Arkansas, you don't believe by trial by jury.
You were watching.
Look, is it don't ask? Is it? I just have to. Is this don't ask or is it don't tell? Because you're not letting me decide.
But you weren't there, and you don't know. So
that means we have total neutrality about it.
But we have to believe
you have no opinion.
To level that.
How can you, as a journalist, in the basis being integrity, which has been in question.
This is how I can do it.
Lately.
Yes.
This is how I.
If you want to start rhyming Hitchens with things.
Go ahead.
Now,
you should do it while I'm here.
I don't know how you can question.
Do it while I'm here, or don't do it at all. Wait. Say that to my face, or don't say it at all.
What I'm saying is,
say it to my face, or don't say it.
Let me finish, because I will.
No.
I will.
I know what you're saying.
In the most recent, the May edition of Vanity Fair.
Would you let him talk?
Yes, he's trying to make an insinuation.
Say it, but he's trying.
That too.
He's trying, and he would do it if you'd shut the hell up.
He wants.
Say it. Suzanne, would you put something over his mouth?
You don't give. You like to show that you don't give a damn about what people think when you dedicate your entire column this month to trying to tit for tat and against the people, your detractors, the people who are saying that you breached this code of ethics, the lunchroom, and all the stuff in the Sidney Blumenthal thing. And you said that no one has accused you of being a snitch, which would mean you acted out of malice or self-promotion. No one has accused you of that. Well, I'm here right now, and that's what I'm accusing you of.
Are you licking my hand?
I have to take it from my...
You can begin, Christopher.
Thank you, Lewis. Well, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming. I'm acutely conscious of, in the first place, having already had my say, so to speak, at some length.
and acutely conscious also of being the only one who stands between you and people who have greater expertise than myself. But I thought I would offer you a play on some recent words which you may have been made to memorize. These words are a peaceful, orderly, democratic transition. You may have heard these words recently uttered in a self-congratulatory, not to say self-regarding manner. You may have had the opportunity to tire of hearing the words peaceful, orderly, democratic transition. You may have wondered why you are so often assured that the great distinction of the United States is that that is what it does or has or can boast of. You may even think it's slightly sinister that you keep on being told that you have a peaceful, democratic, orderly transition tradition. You may wonder even why, if it was so obvious, it had to be restated so often. So I'll stop saying it myself, hoping I've made my play on words point, and direct your attention to two elements only of my folio on Mr. Kissinger. The first being the election of 1968 in these United States. If I can make a claim to, not to originality perhaps, but to a certain synthesis in what I've written, it would be this. I think I can say that Harper's has published for the first time the summa of all the available evidence of how that election was undermined, distorted, fixed by a most appalling piece of cynicism by Richard Nixon and others, in the course of which they went to a foreign military dictatorship, negotiated secretly with that dictatorship to undermine the negotiating position of the American government, the United States government, and its legal and visible negotiators in Paris, made an illegal pact and an amoral pact that this foreign military dictatorship would get a better deal from an incoming Republican administration, and in making this pact took out what one might describe euphemistically as a mortgage or lease on another 4 years of an already proven immoral and atrocious war. The combination of the subversion of that election and the extension of that war as the price of the bargain qualified, I think, to be termed, without any overstatement, the single wickedest act in the history of this republic. And it may be doubted whether it quite qualifies under the tradition of a democratic, peaceful, and orderly transition. Certainly of the four people who concerted that policy, Richard Nixon, Attorney General John Mitchell, Vice President Spiro Agnew, and Henry Kissinger, only one has escaped any kind of indictment so far. John Mitchell was the first Attorney General to go to jail. Richard Nixon had to accept a pardon in order to avoid indictment and impeachment, and Spiro Agnew had to cop a plea also. There's only one unindicted co-conspirator still on the loose. I suggest that's a reproach to a country that considers itself to be bound by law and bound by justice. Democratic, peaceful, orderly transition was also the great boast, and rightly so, of the people of Chile, our southern neighbor, a country that has never offended or threatened to offend or had the capacity to offend or threaten the United States. It was distinguished among its hemispheric neighbors precisely by the fact that when its people had voted, their choice formed the next government, and the armed forces or the police or the oligarchy didn't determine that and couldn't intervene in it. And that will remain the state of affairs until 1970, when it was coldly decided at a meeting in Washington held, among others, by Dr. Kissinger, that there was to be no peaceful, democratic, orderly transition in Chile, that the 60-day constitutionally mandated waiting period between the election of a president, in this case Salvador Allende, and his confirmation, inauguration, would be used for a campaign of murder and subversion in order that that transition not occur. And this involved the cold-blooded planning of the murder of General René Schneider, the head of the Chilean Armed Forces, an honorable conservative and constitutionalist officer in a country which, I repeat, was a democracy that had open diplomatic relations and trade relations with the United States and posed no threat to it. And that murder is now what a lawyer, I think, could decently call a lay-down case. A lay-down case from soup to nuts. We know who commissioned it, who paid for it, who organized it, who shipped the illegal money, who shipped the dirty weapons to Chile to have this done, and who paid the murderers after the crime had been committed. And the same name and the same face recurs throughout. We charge Henry Kissinger with murder for that, and we say that a society that tolerates him is tolerating that too. And that's therefore a big reproach to a society that claims to be bound by law and responsive to justice. And it's of course an utter cynical negation of all the claims that have been made about democratic, peaceful, orderly transition. As I said, of the 4 people who conducted the election subversion in 1968, only 1 remains unindicted. If you now look at the international scene and see the people with whom Dr. Kissinger was in business during his tenure in office, you will find that almost all of them also are in jail in their own countries or are going there. Of Mr. Kissinger's business and political partners, Mr. Suharto, General Pinochet, General Papadopoulos in Greece, the brigadiers in Bangladesh who committed the assassination of Sheikh Mujib, and quite a number of others are in jail, I'm glad to say, tried in courts, proper courts in their own countries, and condemned to life imprisonment. Once again, the grand exception is the man who made their political careers or military careers possible, and he dwells as an honored citizen among us, and we say, too, that that is a reproach to any society that considers itself internationally law-bound or responsive to the claims of justice on the international scale. So let that be my opening bid, and let me accept counteroffers from, or enlargements, or
a very strong bid,
undercuts from
Christopher.
These distinguished gentlemen. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm invited to be unpleasant at the expense of Ayn Rand. and objectivism. Well, that's easy. Well, the novels, first. I mean, as I keep trying to say that, you know, in my view, there's more morality in a novel by George Eliot than there is in any of the 4 Gospels, or the 4 of them put together. I care very much about literature as the place where the real dilemmas, ethical dilemmas, are met and dealt with. So to have novels as transcendently awful as Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead sort of undermines my project. And then, though I have some respect for the virtue of selfishness, a collection of essays, and I've argued about them with the chairman of the Federal Reserve, as a matter of fact. By the way, a state Federal Reserve Bank is not part of the libertarian program. Though Mr. Greenspan seems a bit iffy about this self-evident proposition. I don't think there's any need to have essays advocating selfishness among human beings. I don't know what your impression has been, but some things require no further reinforcement. Lillian Hellman was once in her declining years talking at some campus, and she would peer out over the crowd with her very thick dark glasses, and there was a squawking question from somewhere in the back, said, "Miss Hellman, why haven't you endorsed gay rights?" And Lillian Hellman sort of blearily peered again through and drew herself up and said, "Well, I wonder what word I'm allowed to use in this august company." I'll quote her directly then. She said, "The forms of fucking do not require my endorsement." I wasn't that much of a fan of Miss Hellman. She could be a real bitch, but I thought that said it more or less all. So to have a book strenuously recommending that people be more self-centered seems to me, as the Anglican Church used to say in its critique of Catholicism, a work of supererogation. It's too strenuous.
Let's open it up to others, and let's start with Jim Peters.
The father of our country said, of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. I mean, I could read you 100 quotes of founding fathers talking about the importance of religion.
There is not a word about Christianity.
You know, Joe,
I could get you quotes though from these founding fathers that did talk about Christianity.
George Washington was a deist. Benjamin Franklin,
I think this
whatever
is the
he felt
reason
obliged to
why
say in public, was
we
a
have the
non-believer.
problem that we have during Christmas.
All right, hold on a second. Matt, we're falling back on the deist argument that happens an awful lot.
Not one word about Christianity.
Joe, this is exactly the reason why we have this problem during Christmas. There is a war on Christmas. Liberty Counsel represents Nathan Sage, and we're working with him to try to reverse this ridiculous thing in Newport News, Virginia.
Matt, you know, hold on a second, Matt. You know, let's bring a little light to this, instead of all heat, let's bring a little light to this conversation and talk about trends.
Light only comes from heat.
Okay, thank you so much. Christopher, hold on. Guys, stop. God bless us all. Just stop and let's have a meaningful conversation instead of people talking on top of each other.
Don't invite me on and tell me to keep quiet.
Well, Christopher, you know, why don't you let other people talk for a second, okay?
You invited me.
Okay, so anyway, Matt.
To listen to yours.
Okay, well, you know what, Christopher, I'll never make that mistake again.
Fair
Matt, here's the question, okay? Merry Christmas and good night. Matt, let's have a conversation for a second here.
Thank you.
You're sitting here talking, and other Christians have been complaining about how there's been a war on Christmas for a long time.
They lit not a holiday tree, which they intended to do about a week ago, but a Christmas tree, and that's what the mayor says it will always be now as long as he is mayor. And I applaud him. I applaud Speaker Dennis Hastert for doing the same thing. That's why we launched our Friend or Foe Christmas campaign, and on our website at lc.org we have a memo that talks about what the law is.
Okay, Christopher, go ahead.
I'm supposed to just sit and listen to a broadcast for Jerry Falwell from Lynchburg. Is that right?
Go ahead.
Okay. Look,
go ahead.
The tree long predates Christmas. There's been a festival of light, in fact, and of trees, Yule logs, trees. That's why they're all from Scandinavia, since the winter solstice was first thought of, long before any mythical event in the Middle East, a birth the date of which even the Bible cannot get right and repeatedly gets wrong. That's fine. Celebrate it all they like. It would be impossible to live in this country and not notice that there are lots of Christians who like to celebrate the birthday of the person they believe is their savior. You cannot possibly escape it, but we don't want it to enjoy any public preference or subsidy. And the Constitution says that we don't have to. And the progress you're talking
about, it doesn't say that, Christopher.
This guy from Lynchburg defines progress as teaching junk science to our children, and leaving us the mockery of the world by pretending that we did not evolve.
Joe, I don't want to hold on a second. We're not going to debate intelligent design right here.
And he's a front man.
Joe,
he's a front man for the fat-faced Reverend.
Joe, I think Christopher is really
okay. You know what? This unfortunately is now moving into intelligent design. I want to thank you for being with us, Christopher.
Christopher has actually made my point.
That's going to have to be it tonight. Thank both of you for being with us. Hopefully, we can have this discussion in the future.
What did Christians used to fight about and kill about? What kind of Christian you should be? The 30 Years' War was a massacre between Christians. It was eventually decided in Europe only out of exhaustion. We can't go on doing this. We can't go on killing each other over different interpretations of the Bible. Some bits of that do survive in Northern Ireland in our own day, in a different form. Not that different, but that's where it comes from. In America, there were so many different kinds of Christian that it was decided it has to be a state compromise. No one will ever rule for one sect. It's impossible. No one possesses the entire knowledge, even of these dictated texts, one of which God only speaks Hebrew, and in the other one of which God only speaks Arabic. And in all cases, there are discrepancies. And though I revere the King James Version of the Bible, I also revere the Lady Governor of Texas, who once said about religious instruction in schools that if Hispanic immigrants having to assimilate it in this way, she said, well, if English is good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for me. You see, in other words, the essential absurdity that what the Wahhabi clan, or sect rather, it would be better to say, much better, I mean sect, yes, of Saudi Arabia, has its own version of the Quran, which is actually available now in the American prison system, which openly says that unbelievers, which means those who don't believe at all, or those who believe differently, Jews and Christians, are not people of the book, they're enemies. That's their version of it. That's handed out now
by tolerant people who believe in pluralism. The Saudi government has paid for madrasas in America to promulgate that view of Islam. The Saudis sent envoys to Bosnia, where I was full scale for defending the Muslims of southern Europe from massacre by Christian and fascists of two kinds, Orthodox Greek fascists and Catholic Croat fascists and Serbian Orthodox fascists. Yeah. They sent envoys to say, we're Muslims, we're with you. So the first thing, however, you'll have to do is destroy all your graveyards, which went back to the Ottoman era, because they're profane. We don't have gravestones. That's idolatry. So you can be happy in a way, you should be happy. There is a civil war in Islam now. That's what's going on.
Yes, indeed, absolutely.
It's not Islamism versus tolerance or versus Christianity, Judaism or Zionism. It's a civil war in Islam whereby a very ugly group of people hope to take over and restart the empire of the caliphate, so they're not anti-imperialist, and impose the Sharia, which means they're not pluralists.
Please welcome back to the program, Christopher Hitchens. Come Good to see you.
Nice to be back.
Christopher Hitchens, you are one of the only men to travel, maybe the only man, to travel to all three axis of evil countries.
Yes,
that is correct.
Yeah, I think I'm the only one to have written from there. There may have been a diplomat who's been, there's certainly an arms dealer or two. But I've been in North Korea and Iran and Iraq several times and in Afghanistan and on the Pakistan border.
Okay, so there's a Ural pass that many people don't get punched.
Well, the frequent flyer stuff in Afghan airlines, you don't want to know.
No, it's a little rough. It ain't a bag of peanuts, I'm sure. Here's what I want to ask you. Here's how you're going to help me. Help me understand why I am wrong about Iraq. I am confused. I don't know what staying. I don't know what.
I just watched your act.
I know. I don't know what staying the course means.
I could see that too.
I don't know what when he says this, we're going to fight him over there instead of fighting him over here. I think, but those other dudes who just had planes, there were just 20 of them. It's not a nation that attacked us. It was an ideology. Explain to me why I'm wrong.
Well, I'll give you something.
Please.
Just saying fighting them over there instead of over here is contradicting himself. It's either global or it isn't. So we're either fighting them everywhere or nowhere, and you make yourself a hostage to fortune. The next bomb that goes off in London, people say, I thought we'd taken care of that by fighting them there. That's stupid.
Why then the urgency to go into Iraq, other than as an experiment drawn up on a bulletin board that would create a flowering of democracy that would change a region overnight to suddenly love and respect us?
I guess everyone's entitled to one softball question. Now, you just did give me one.
Really?
Urgency. The big argument is, were we right to confirm Saddam Hussein in power after defeating him in Kuwait? Should he be left in power in 1991? My side says no. That's the original mistake.
Bush's dad said yes.
You say, and Bush's dad said yes, and it's very good that his son has cancelled that mistake. To say it's urgent, having let Iraq rot and crash for nearly 12 years, 13 years, that's not urgency. Second thing is, there are 4 conditions under which a country can say told its sovereignty is over. One is repeated aggression against neighboring states. One is fooling around with the Non-Proliferation Treaty. One is harboring gangsters and internationally wanted terrorists. And one is genocide, which, if you sign the convention, means you have to act, you're mandated, to prevent or punish. Iraq had broken all 4, more than once. And the United States Senate had passed legislation in 1998, unanimously, 98 to nothing, the Iraq Liberation Act. It shall be the policy of the United States to remove this regime and begin the Middle East again. What's wrong with that? Anyone who wanted to complain should have written to their Democratic senator in 98 and said, what's this about you promising to remove Saddam?
Here's why.
And they didn't.
Here's why we didn't.
Because it was an obviously right thing to be wanting to do.
No, because it was an obviously symbolic thing to do. And nobody here thought anybody would be crazy enough to get into the British and Churchillian method of, hey, let's just go in the Mideast and redraw the map the way we think it should be drawn.
We're not redrawing the map.
What could happen there?
We're not redrawing the map.
We're not redrawing the map?
No, excuse me. The applause is dying faintly away. I might get a clap before I'm done.
People very much appreciate it. By the way, I really enjoy this
lost
because...
my place.
I'm sorry. All right.
I really can't remember where we were just before that. This is terrible.
You were saying to me that you agree that Bush is conducting this incompetently.
Yes.
I've just
it's the old Bugs Bunny trick.
I've just written a long article for the Weekly Standard, which does say exactly that.
Is that true?
Yeah. But I think he's right on the main principle.
Let me try and get your position then, and it may be one that's actually not as far from me as
unfortunately,
perhaps
go to war
I
with the president you have. It's
he's really
he's right on the main point. We have deadly enemies in front of whom we cannot retreat. They do mean us harm, and it is wrong to say that the cause of terrorism is our resistance to it, which is the root fallacy that's now being put around. People say, if we weren't mean to them, they wouldn't be so mean to us.
Here's where I can see the
Absolute
difference. Agree with.
We're turning now to our top story, the outrage in the Muslim world over caricatures of the Prophet Muhammad. Any depictions of Muhammad are offensive to the faithful. And we began by talking about the decision of many media outlets, including CNN, to pixelate the images of Muhammad.
Now, I know, as well as you do, that you have not done that in order to avoid sparing the hurt feelings of my fellow guest. You've done it because you're afraid of retaliation and of intimidation. Now, I'd like to ask him and anyone else who agrees with him is watching, is that the relationship they want to have with the free press? Because if we have to use this stupid word offensive, those of us who believe in the Enlightenment and the Constitution and the First Amendment are very much offended by this mad, babyish conduct. But we don't go out and kidnap the nearest Muslim we can find and take him hostage till someone apologizes.
Okay.
We don't violate diplomatic immunity. We don't, which is one of the most precious things in the international community, much more precious than the right of Muslims not to have their feelings hurt. The whole thing is a scandal, and we're all running scared from it.
Okay, let's let
This has
Ahmed
to stop
Yunus.
now.
Ahmed, jump in here. I know you want to respond.
Yeah, absolutely. This is not about hurt feelings. It's about strategic discourse. The people that we see on TV are... well, hold on, Christopher. The people that we see on TV are less than 1% of the Muslim masses. The gravamen of the discussion here is the vast majority of Muslim moderates that are offended from their role in a post-9/11 and in a conflict-oriented situation, which is at the apex of counterterrorism, at the apex of an engagement, of a discussion of hearts and minds. Of course, freedom of expression stands, and no one is asking the Danish government to stifle expression. But
yes,
freedom of expression,
yes,
hold on, Christopher, freedom of expression and the responsibilities of discussion, the responsibilities of those with power and privilege to ensure that there is comity between different groups, a belated response by the government, and then a continuing of republishing and reprinting these cartoons. We have freedom of expression here in the United States, but the president and the major media have chosen not to engage. The Pope believes in freedom of expression, but he has condemned these cartoons.
No,
it's about strategic
Christopher, I want to let Christopher in here. Christopher, I want to...
what is this babble? The State Department has said that it apologizes and thinks these things are offensive, and it's done so without, as far as I know, any permission from the American people to say that we take that view. I'm glad to hear you say it's only 1% of the Muslim world that takes this opinion. In that case, why are we treating the leaders of these lynch mobs and bullying gangs as if they were representative of your religion?
That's a very good question.
And why is it that we can't get condemnation so easily or at all when, for example, Shia mosques and funeral processions in Iraq are blown up by Muslim fascists?
Christopher,
Isn't that sacrilege to you?
Ahmed Yunus, jump in.
The vast majority of Muslims condemn attacks on Shia communities, condemn attacks on Christian communities in Muslim countries.
Name one.
The Council on American-Islamic Relations sent a delegation to Iraq to try to release Jill Carroll. We have done the same with Margaret Hassan. We engaged continuously.
Hostage trading.
We were against the Taliban.
Wait a minute. I want to jump in here for both of you. Christopher, hang on. Christopher, I got to jump in here because the point is made here, and this comes up over and over again, that when we talk about the most radical of Muslims, they're the ones who get the attention. The whole of the faith gets painted with this brush by the kinds of pictures we're showing today of burning buildings. As awful as it is there a fair point being made here that this clearly is not representative?
Absolutely, and if we look at...
Christopher, please.
Well, that's for Muslims to decide. If they want to condemn this, they can, but actually a lot of Muslim governments have instead, and authorities, have instead joined the condemnation of the cartoons and urged the Danish government to bring pressure on the free press in Denmark.
Because
it's absolutely outrageous.
They are opportunists. We condemn that type of anti-Semitic behavior. We condemn it when it's against any other community, be it by Muslims.
That wasn't
like
the question. That wasn't the question.
This is the same Europe
that wasn't what you were being asked.
This is the same Europe that had a genocide against Muslims, the largest genocide since the Holocaust. We have got to be strategic. We have got to ensure that we are not negligently bolstering the haters that are finding excuses
Okay, Christopher,
I'm not just a
jump in.
potted plant here. He wasn't asked that question. He was asked why, when Jewish people or Christians, or the largest, in my opinion, the most important group in the world, those of us who don't believe in religion and claim the rights of the Enlightenment, when we're offended, you were asked, why don't we take the occasion to go and set fire to embassies of democratic countries or kidnap civilians? That's what you're being asked. You're still claiming Muslims have a special right to be offended, and that is very offensive indeed.
Absolutely not. I am claiming that Muslims have an equal right to find human dignity in the way that they are treated in society. And Christopher, if you feel that there is an attack against you, you have the right to respond. That is the same freedom of speech that you're saying.
I want to put it to you this way. I mean, do non-Muslims have any obligation, in your view, to be respectful of this aspect of the Muslim faith and to make an extra effort not to offend?
Look, I'm not asking for the right to slaughter a pig in a mosque or to defecate on a Quran or anything of this kind. I am saying, though, that religion makes very large claims for itself. Islam claims that it is the total solution to all human problems, and
this is not about Islam.
And that the sooner that it's imposed on everyone, the better. Well, that's a point of view, but it can't, if it's going to make such claims, it has to drop the demand that it be immune from criticism and especially from satire. To many of us, the claims of the Prophet Muhammad, or his claim to be a prophet, are absurd. Of course we have the right to do that, just as we have the right to represent unchaste nuns and child-raping priests and the other people who also claim a special right because they claim that their own bigotry is divine.
Who wants a third world war? The Iranian president says that one member state of the United Nations should be wiped physically from the map with all its people.
Yeah.
He says the United States is a satanic power. Members of his government, named members of his government, have been caught sponsoring death squads. He's lied. He's lied to the European Union about his nuclear program.
But you know that a lot
he says he believes the Messiah is about to come back. Who's looking for a war here?
So does George Bush, by the way.
President Bush has said...
That's not facetious.
That's not facetious. Your audience, which will clap apparently anything, is frivolous.
I'm just saying that...
I've been on the Jon Stewart show, I've been on your show, I've seen you make about 5 George Bush IQ jokes per night. There's no one I know who can't do it. You know what I think? This is now the joke that stupid people laugh at. It's a joke that any dumb person can laugh at because they think they're smarter, they can prove they're smarter than the president. Like the people who make booing and mooing noises in your audience.
But sometimes it's
none of whom are smarter than the president.
But sometimes a cigar is really a cigar.
When the Philadelphia Inquirer decided to publish that same cartoon, they called the Muslim community and said, we want to do something about this and we want to create dialogue. Now that was responsible. That was socially responsible.
Christopher, go ahead.
When Dr. Samuel Johnson had finished his great lexicography, the first real English dictionary, he was visited by various delegations of people to congratulate him, including a delegation of London's respectable womanhood who came to his parlour in Fleet Street and said, Doctor, we congratulate you on your decision to exclude all indecent words from your dictionary. And he said, ladies, I congratulate you on your persistence in looking them up. I think anyone who understands that story, which I'm pleased to see everybody obviously does, will see through the sinister piffle we were just treated to just now. If people are determined to be offended, if they will climb up on the ladder, balancing it precariously on their own toilet system, to be upset by what they see through the neighbour's bathroom window, there's nothing you can do about that. The imams in Denmark did the following. First, they invited the intervention of 22 foreign ambassadors in Denmark's internal affairs. Itself a disgrace. The Danish Prime Minister quite rightly repudiated it. Then they added 2 cartoons of their own, drawn by them, one of them showing the Prophet Muhammad in the shape of a pig. Then they shot those around the Muslim world until they could get kindling going under the embassies of a small democracy in the capital cities of countries where demonstrations are normally not allowed. They violated Danish diplomatic immunity. They tried to sabotage the Danish economy. There were random pogroms and attacks on individual Scandinavians. And David Cesarini says he doesn't like the reminiscence of the 1930s that is inscribed in the cartoon. I don't like the reminiscence of the 1930s that is involved in a Kristallnacht against
Denmark, put up by religious demagogues and thugs. And that's what needs to be condemned.
In a moment, we'll hear from Franklin Graham, the son of Billy Graham, who has fond memories of Jerry Falwell as a friend and a pastor. First, a very different point of view, though, a representation of another side of viewpoint toward Jerry Falwell from author and outspoken atheist Christopher Hitchens. He's the author of God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. I spoke to him earlier in the program. Christopher, I'm not sure if you believe in heaven, but if you do you think Jerry Falwell is in it?
No, and I think it's a pity there isn't a hell for him to go to.
What is it about him that brings up such vitriol?
The empty life of this ugly little charlatan proves only one thing, that you can get away with the most extraordinary offenses to morality and to truth in this country if you'll just get yourself called reverend. Who would, even at your network, have invited on such a little toad to tell us that the attacks of September the 11th were the result of our sinfulness and were God's punishment if they hadn't got some kind of clerical qualification? People like that should be out in the street shouting and hollering with a cardboard sign and selling pencils from a cup. The whole consideration of this horrible little person is offensive to very, very many of us who have some regard for truth and for morality and who think that ethics do not require that lies be told to children by evil old men. That we're not told that people who believe like Falwell will be snatched up into heaven, where I'm glad to see he skipped the rapture, just found on the floor of his office, while the rest of us go to hell. How dare they talk to children like this? How dare they raise money from credulous people on their huckster-like Elmer Gantry radio stations and fly around in private jets as he did, giggling and sniggering all the time at what he was getting away with. Do you get an idea now of what I mean to say?
Yeah, no, I think you're making yourself very clear. I mean,
how dare he say, for example, that the Antichrist is already present amongst us and is an adult male Jew, while all the time fawning on the worst elements in Israel, with his other hand pumping anti-Semitic innuendos into American politics, along with his friends Robertson and Graham.
And yet there are...
encouraging the most extreme theocratic fanatics and maniacs on the West Bank and in Gaza not to give an inch of what he thought of as holy land to the people who already live there, undercutting and ruining every Democrat and secularist in the Jewish state in the name of God. He's done us an enormous, enormous disservice by this sort of demagogy.
What do you think it says about America and politics in America that he was so successful in mobilizing huge swaths of the country to come out and vote?
I'm not certain at all that he did deserve this reputation.
You don't think he does?
Well, I'm not certain that he was a mobilizer. We certainly hoped to be one. Well, the fact is that the country suffers to a considerable extent from paying too much by way of compliment to anyone who can describe themselves as a person of faith. Jimmy Swaggart, Ted Haggard, Chaucerian frauds, people who are simply pickpockets, and frauds who prey on the gullible.
Do you believe he believed what he spoke?
And the unwary? Of course not. He woke up every morning, as I say, pinching his chubby little flanks and thinking, I've got away with it again.
You think it was a complete fraud, really?
Yes.
You don't believe that, I mean, in his reading of the Bible, you don't think he was sincere in his, I mean, whether you agree or not with his reading the Bible, you don't think he was sincere in what he spoke?
No. I think he was a conscious charlatan and bully and fraud. I think if he read the Bible at all, and I would doubt that he could actually read any long book at all, that he did so only in the most hucksterish, as we say, Bible-pounding way. I'm going to repeat what I said before about the Israeli question. It's very important. Jerry Falwell kept saying to his own crowd, yeah, you've got to like the Jews because they can make more money in 10 minutes than you can make in a lifetime. He was always full, as his friends Robertson and Graham are and were, of anti-Semitic innuendo, yet in the most base and hypocritical way, he encouraged the worst elements among Jewry. He got Menachem Begin to give him the Jabotinsky Medal, celebrating an alliance between Christian fundamentalism and Jewish fanaticism that has ruined the chances for peace in the Middle East. Lots of people are going to die and are already leading miserable lives because of the nonsense preached by this man. It may have struck you, ladies and gentlemen, that there's a big relationship,
between this marvelous time of year and living in a one-party state. Nothing makes me think more than at this time of year of our oldest, humanity's oldest enemy, the authoritarian dictatorship, where you can't go anywhere without listening to the same music, where you can't go anywhere without hearing the name of the great leader and his son, the dear leader, where all broadcasts, all songs, all jokes, all references are, just for that magic few weeks, just exactly like living in fucking North Korea. Now, there's a much older objection to this, and when I look back, as we all do, don't we, at this time of year, to our childhood, to those dear dead days of long ago, what I remember is the beautiful carol that was coined for us by Tom Lehrer. And with your permission, I want to share it with you so that we can get the X back in Xmas. And some of you may by now have the song sheet, but I thought I would do my own rendition first a cappella, and then as a community, as Americans, my fellow Americans, we'd all do it together. All right? Are we agreed? Very well. So as the opening of our toast, I go like this, and this is how I remember it. I can do it with my eyes closed. The main verses. Christmas time is here, by golly, disapproval would be folly. Deck the halls with hunks of holly. Fill the cup and don't say when. Kill the turkeys, ducks, and chickens. Mix the punch, drag out the dickens. Even though the prospect sickens. Brother, here we go again. Relations sparing, no expensal. Send some useless old utensil. Or a matching pen and pencil. Just the thing I need. How nice. The sky, don't stand underneath when they fly by. Bravo! It's annoying to me now to read every time it's discussed in the press or in Congress that it simulates the feeling of drowning. It doesn't simulate the feeling of drowning. You are being drowned slowly. There are people who are sort of former or current SEER, that stands for Survive, Evade, Resist, Escape program, in which these horrible techniques and others are taught. And there are quite a lot of these people who are now in, so to say, private practice.
These objects are being released if you experience unbearable stress or ED, say the word. If you see that word at any point during this exercise, you will immediately discontinue. Cease this exercise and demonstration. Please understand.
All right, are you breathing? Relax, turn your head this way. Head over here. Turn to your left.
Bring it up on your side.
And your head. All right. Let's meditate your pulse.
Hi, thanks for coming. If you hold your breath, it has the effect of tightening the grip of this stuff on over your face and mouth and nostrils. So it's a smothering feeling as well as a drowning feeling. They told me that when I activated the dead man's handle, which is a simple process, you simply release something, you let it go. I didn't do that. I practically, even though my hands were bound, I sort of, as near as you could, I threw the thing out of my hand. I mean, I really wanted it to stop. And I could swear I shouted the code word, but I hadn't remembered to do anything like that.
Everything completely goes on you when you're breathing water. You can't think about anything else. It would be bad enough if you did have something. Suppose they wanted to know where a relative of yours was, or a lover, say. You feel, well, I'm going to betray them now, because this has to come to an end. I can't take this anymore. But what if you didn't have anything? What if they'd got the wrong guy? Then you'd be in danger of losing your mind very quickly, I think. I think I sympathize a good deal more, because as a result of this very brief experience, if I do anything that gets my heart rate up and I'm breathing hard, panting, I have a slight panic sensation that I'm not going to be able to catch my breath again. And I have to drink some water and sort of just assure myself a bit. I'm not like this at all. I don't have nightmares either. But lately I've been having this feeling of waking up, being smothered, having to push everything off my face.
The panel is assembled. Chris Hitchens, columnist for Vanity Fair. Christopher, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
The whole name is correct. You have written that McCain and Palin should be decisively repudiated.
Yes.
What's your reaction to what Scott McClellan just said?
Well, he's more pro-Obama than I am, perhaps paradoxically. I just think that McCain and Palin have, in a sense, forced the choice. Obama has improved during the campaign, I think, clearly as a person and as a candidate and as a potential president, whereas McCain looks about 2 or 3 years older than he did at the beginning of it. And it shows in all kinds of ways, from addressing audiences as my fellow prisoners to the extraordinary, bizarre attacks he's now making on Bush, which, as he might himself have put it, if he wanted to do, he should have done a long time ago. And thus forcing us to think, what if he was suffering or would suffer soon from diminished capacity, thus making the choice of his vice presidential stand-in of great importance, and thus making that frivolous, irresponsible, unthought decision even more disgraceful than it would otherwise have been. It's a responsible person cannot cast a ballot for the Republican ticket next month. Just can't be done. Look, let's not beat about the bush. What? Right. She was chosen because she's a sop to the extreme right wing who don't like McCain. That's all she's there for. And it shows. I mean, she's
Lars,
Larry, I disagree. I have to tell you
former
something.
Here comes one of them.
Former Massachusetts Governor William Weld
in negotiation with the Pakistanis who are trying to recolonize Afghanistan through the Taliban. And on this question, Sarah Palin has lied about what Senator Obama's been saying without conscience and without scruple. And her misrepresentation of what he said about Afghanistan could only be because she's too stupid or because she's too cynical.
She's not
Terry,
stupid at all.
today, Governor Palin made mockery of the, for Terry Holt, Governor Palin made mockery today of the use of fruit fly in medical experimentation, yet in fact it has been one of the genetic forerunners in discovery in the area of things like autism. Right. Now, it sounded easy, but why would she make, when you have knowledge of the fruit fly's importance?
She doesn't believe in genetics. She's a creationist.
Why didn't Chris answer? I think he's obviously much more interested.
Terry, go ahead.
Well, I guess to me this seems to be.
In the Second World War, the British had a special prison for captured Nazi spies. And you were fired in that prison. If you even raised a hand, you even threatened violence against them. This was a time London was being bombed every single night.
All right, Mr. Hitchens. Listen, we respect your point of view. I'm just putting forth mine, and we'll let the folks decide as always. And we thank you for coming out.
We barely got our trousers off. We should pursue this.
All right.
He's the reincarnation of JFK, LBJ, FDR, Reagan, Hitler, Stalin, Adlai Stevenson, or Nelson Mandela. Who is Obamable? Is he knowable or unknowable? And is it a plus or a minus to his presidency that people still don't think they know who the president is?
Well, to paraphrase something once said by Penelope Gilliard, one of the classic sounds of the New York Sunday morning is that of Frank Rich barking up the wrong tree. In this case, every tree in sight. Obama is not center-left, but he's left of center. He's never pretended to be anything else. His single most attractive quality, I think, is the belief in his own luck. You remember that was what Bonaparte thought was the only qualification for generalship. Is he lucky? Obama knows he's been fantastically fortunate. Everyone in Chicago got out of his way. either by mortgaging their wives on eBay or being caught leaving the wrong club, or they just all running against him, as the black Republican Alan Keyes did, on the grounds that he, Obama, wasn't really black because he wasn't a descendant of slaves. He was an African. When you get that from the Republican black candidate, you know you're lucky. And Obama knows that about himself. The question is, how long is this luck going to hold? I'll give you an example that everyone will remember perhaps when I mention it, but because of him, his own qualities, has generally been forgotten. You'll recall that an American ship was taken by pirates off Somalia when the president had been in office about 3 months. And someone must have gone to him and said, well, Mr. President, we can either have a hostage standoff negotiation with these people, or we can take it to the United Nations and appeal to the government, such as it is of Somalia, and protract the situation in that way, or we can send the Navy SEALs and tell them to do 4 headshots, there were 4 kidnappers, and bring the ship back. And he must have said the third option is obviously the best one, because the Navy SEALs delivered 4 headshots, just 4. It was all over, and the ship and the crew and the passengers were all back in a few days. Now, that must have taken some nerve in the first few weeks, and it could all have gone fantastically wrong, as every other policy towards Somalia always has. Why isn't it famous? Why isn't it better known about him? Because what would Reagan have done if he'd done that? You'd never have heard the end of it. There had been a big speech saying, USA, USA, we're number one. They can run, but they can't hide. And all that nonsense. Obama didn't boast about it for a second. He basically thought, those who need to know have got the message, and I don't need to brag about it. That I thought was very impressive. That's why I believe, and have written ever since he began running for the nomination, that those who vote for him because they're members of MoveOn.org, who've already proved themselves to be stupid, are stupid twice because they're voting for someone who absolutely doesn't represent or stand for anything that they believe.
So how do you weigh this Obama's standing as the world's leader versus American policy and reactions to the US?
Well, I think there's more than one way to measure opinion. For example, to take a country that I have visited a bit and know a bit about, Iran, there's no question that among the Iranian young, George Bush was very popular because they said they heard what they wanted from him. He said, if you're willing to fight for democracy, we're willing to take your side. Iran is a red state in that respect, in many, many ways. And I think the supporters of the president should be depressed that when the young Iranians were being truncheoned into puddles of blood in the street by their theocratic dictators and slave owners, they were shouting, Obama, where are you? Because they didn't know where he stood. I think that's much more important than any finding by Pew. In his speech to the Iranian people, which was broadcast directly to them, the president said, we want to bring the Islamic Republic of Iran back into the family of nations. Sounds all right. Why is Iran not in the family of nations, though? Which he seems to agree it isn't. Because it's an Islamic Republic is why. That's what keeps it out, because it claims to own everyone in Iran. It has an ideological theory, the Vilayat-e-Faqih, that says that everyone, not including people who aren't even Muslim or Shia, is the property of the clergy, is a ward of the theocracy. And because it develops illegal nuclear weapons and has a revolutionary guard that's run a military coup against the people of the country, which is also the possessor of those weapons. These are the reasons it's not in the international community. That's a circle you can't square. You know, with this, the Kurdish question was Kissinger giving weapons to people saying, we'll back you as long as you fight, then cutting off the weapons and not telling them. That's not the same as a principled stand in favor of Iranian democracy in the least. Anyway, you must therefore be pleased that Bush's son finally helped establish Kurdish autonomy in Iraq in a free Republican Mesopotamia.
Of course.
Though I didn't hear you say so. I'm glad to hear that. On the point of purchase, I'd like to take up on a single word, very important. You wouldn't say, would you, that the United States has no purchase on the government of Israel?
No, I wouldn't.
No. I mean, in other words, if the Israelis are going to continue to build settlements in an identifiable, just a single suburb of Jerusalem, where most of the Arab population can produce documents proving they've owned their homes since before the British Mandate. If American policy can't get them to stop building in that one identifiable suburb of Jerusalem, then there's no such thing as leverage or purchase. And Obama went to all the trouble to point out that this is a terrible thing. He should have said more than he did, in my view, that it's theft as well as an obstacle to negotiations, and then walked away from that. So that a punk government like that of Netanyahu, under the influence of a ratbag religious party, the Shas party, crackpot Orthodox party that happens to run the Ministry of Housing, is allowed to humiliate the United States, not just in the person of its vice president, who was there at the time, but its president and its Congress and its voters. And immediately the president backpedals, and now he's being attacked by some leading American Jewish organizations as being, in principle, anti-Israel. So he's had a fight with one of the Democratic Party's most important voting blocs. He's done nothing for the Palestinians, and he's made himself look like a jerk. This is not impressive.
But when was American policy in the Middle East impressive?
Well, actually, I'll give you an example. When George Bush Sr. Said to the Israelis, if you go on like this, I will ask Congress to suspend your loan guarantees, I thought that was extremely impressive. And so did everyone else in the Middle East, and it led to the nearest we've ever had to a proper peace conference. That was in Madrid. Bill Clinton chose to run that year from the right against Bush, saying that he thought Bush was being soft on Cuba, just like Kennedy. Thought Eisenhower and Nixon were being soft on communism in Cuba, and also from the right on Israel, saying if he was president, the Israelis would not be subjected to this kind of pressure. So the last time that there was an impressive American policy, it was a Republican administration, and it was undone by the hero of every liberal in this room.
Okay, so we
not
have...
this liberal.
I'm not sure the great triangulator is a hero of
you know what
all
I mean.
Liberals.
They all thought he was hard done by.
And we just...
Surprised he left out the Icelandic volcanic ash cloud as well. Obama hadn't dispelled. But the fact remains and has to be faced that in his, I believe it was in his acceptance speech at Chicago, the president did say that we'll be able to date from this the moment when, and then various spreads of hope and aspiration and so on, and also the moment when the oceans stop rising. I remember thinking, he'll be sorry he said that. He'll be deeply sorry he said that. And also wondering if possibly there wasn't a note of hubris creeping in here. This is the point where the really bad columnist would have mentioned King Canute already, and always, as people do, got it wrong.
Well, one thing that, of course, is coming back is that the citations to Paul Kennedy's 1987, The End of American Empire book are going up again. Anne and Donna both said it's no drama Obama. That's the bottom line here. That's the guy we want. God, that's a long way from the reason he's in the White House. How do you square those circles?
And I think some distance from reality too, and your mention of high and low is a nice segue to what I wanted to draw your attention to anyway. A detail, but a useful one. The president is a secret smoker. His Surgeon General's report is mandated every year by Congress to have a report on the president's health. So for all his promises to quit, he still hasn't. This argues for me contents under pressure, which is one of my favorite expressions. I like people who are suffering from that. But he does have some sense of the appalling gravity of the office. He knows that at any minute, what happened in South Korea yesterday could be repeated, and we'd all be upended into a terrible confrontation that was none of our making. And people would be glad then, would they, that there was no United States superpower? They would think the world was safer if the North Koreans could do that and think that America wouldn't fight. Well, beware of what you want. I think that the president's role models are not presidential. I think that's one of the most attractive things about his writing. His role models are the great leaders of American civil resistance and human rights. People like, of course, Dr. King, but also less likely people like Dorothy Day or Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and others. I think those are the people he models himself on. You're not allowed, if you're asked what president you personally would wish to be, you're not allowed to mention Lincoln because it's blasphemous by definition.
Even if you come from...
Even if you're from Illinois or Hawaii, or it doesn't
or
matter where.
Indonesia,
it doesn't matter where you're from, or from Bali. But it's no one would do that any more than they would say Washington or Jefferson. But I'm sure that if he had one, that would be it. And the point about Abraham Lincoln was that all his opponents hugely underestimated him, thought he was a blowhard and a big mouth and an easy talker, but didn't have any real nerve or any real vertebrae. I think that's what we're going to find out. And I think that's what the president is between drags reflecting on.
Yes. Anyone want to jump in on this?
Yeah. I find the use of both Hispanic and Latino as portmanteau or all-embracing terms are very misleading. If you go and talk to the Cubans in Miami, and then to the El Salvadorans who live in my district, Ward 1 of Washington, D.C., or the Dominicans who live on Long Island, it's true to say that they all have a common language, but that's about the most you can say. The difference between a Mexican and a Guatemalan, for example, very large indeed. It's white ethnicity is now more or less invisible. No one cares any longer whether someone's from Germany or Poland. It used to matter a hell of a lot there. And with Spanish-speaking American immigrants, these differences are more vivid rather than less. So you beware of aggregating it too much. It's something that needs more disaggregation. Well, as someone who's brought up in Fleet Street, I can't get very excited about the idea of bias in newspapers. I mean, the British press, and I've even noticed some tendencies of this sort in Australia, can be extremely partisan, and you would be a bloody fool if you didn't know what political party the newspaper you were reading supported, and if that wasn't reflected in its coverage. I can't get too virginal or too maidenly in my disapproval of this kind of thing. What does give me diarrhea, I mean quite acute diarrhea, are the people who say that they are themselves the guardians of objectivity and that can't be challenged. The New York Times every morning has on its front page a thing that says all the news that's fit to print. If that doesn't make you barf, what will? Now, Edward J. Epstein once wrote a very good book on the origins of the American networks. He did big interviews about all the people who ran them. And it was all complete. He hadn't got a title. And he went to do one final interview with the head of NBC, who said, well, Mr. Epstein, some people report the news from one person's point of view. Others report the news from another person's point of view. We report the news from nobody's point of view. So he had a title. He called the book News from Nowhere. It's that kind of bogus objectivity and neutrality that's to be watched out for. People who let you know where they're coming from are fine by me.
Fire! 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 Now you've heard it. Not shouted in a crowded theatre, admittedly, as I realize I seem now to have shouted it in the Hogwarts dining room. But the point is made. Everyone knows the fatuous verdict of the greatly overpraised Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, who asked for an actual example of when it would be proper to limit speech or define it as an action, gave that of shouting fire in a crowded theatre. It's very often forgotten what he was doing in that case was sending to prison a group of Yiddish-speaking socialists whose literature was printed in a language most Americans couldn't read, opposing President Wilson's participation in the First World War and the dragging of the United States into this sanguinary conflict which the Yiddish-speaking socialists had fled from Russia to escape. In fact, it could be just as plausibly argued that the Yiddish-speaking socialists who were jailed by the excellent and overpraised Judge Oliver Wendell Holmes were the real firefighters, were the ones who were shouting fire when there really was fire in a very crowded theatre indeed. And who is to decide? Well, keep that question, if you would, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, I hope I may say comrades and friends, before your minds. I exempt myself from the Speaker's kind offer of protection that was so generously proffered at the opening of this evening. Anyone who wants to say anything abusive about or to me is quite free to do so, and welcome, in fact, at their own risk.
Gentlemen, the other side, sir. This chap here, yeah.
Good evening. In my opinion, you've made some valid criticisms on the influence of God and religion upon our society.
Thank you.
However, do you acknowledge that some notion of spirituality is pertinent to maintaining humility and perspective of our own existence, which does not necessarily depend on a notion of a God or a deity?
I had the experience last evening, of going in to hear evensong at the cathedral in Hereford. And just as the bells finished tolling, got there just in time for the start of the prebendal singers, and ran into Anthony Grayling on the way out, who, before I could say to him, "What are you doing here?" said, "Christopher, Hitch, what the hell?" And I said, no, I wouldn't miss it. And I'm glad I was there, by the way, because if it wasn't for me and a couple of old ladies in motorized chariots, the choir, the prebendal choir, would be singing to an empty nave
which I think would have been a shame. And George Herbert, who I think is probably the greatest, along with John Donne, the greatest English religious writer and poet, was at Hereford. And Lawrence Traherne was at a parish. Actually had the living of a parish just down the road. And you wouldn't want to and couldn't possibly be without that tradition. You'd lose a lot of your sense of moral proportion, I think. So the great cultural question to me is not how to reject religion, because that's easy enough to do, but how to transcend it, how to make something out of the extraordinary architecture, poetry, music, and painting that it's produced. I give the example, because it's not an English or a Christian one, or a monotheistic one at all, of the Parthenon, about which I wrote a book. If the Parthenon was to be destroyed, I don't know how one would go on contemplating things. It would be a loss greater than perhaps that of a friend almost, or a relative. And its existence, and indeed its restoration, means a great deal to me, and I've written a lot about it. But I have no interest at all in the cult of Pallas Athena, or the worship of her, or in the Eleusinian mysteries and that cult, or in fact in Athenian imperialism and the Melian expedition, about which Sir Peter knows a lot more than I do. But, so the cultural question is, how does one preserve, appreciate, enhance the symmetry and beauty of the Parthenon, while discarding superstition and the supernatural? And I believe that's a cultural task that everyone has something to contribute to.
Thank you.
I mean to say, sorry, to which everyone has something to contribute. Sorry. To be an unbeliever is not to be merely open-minded. It is rather a decisive admission of uncertainty that is dialectically connected to the repudiation of the totalitarian principle in the mind as well as in politics. But that's my Hitch-22. I have already described some of the rehearsals for this war, which the relativists so plaintively call endless, as if it were not indeed the latest chapter of an eternal struggle. And I find that for the remainder of my days I shall be happy enough to see if I can emulate the understatement of Commander Hitchens, and to say that at least I know what I am supposed to be doing.